Chapter 1928. Meg could totally understand Irina's anger. These guys' target was Amy, but they didn't know what Amy looked like or where she was hiding. So, they chose to try their luck and capture all the half-elves around the age of 3.5 in Chaos City. They also killed everything that could affect their plan, such as the parents of these half-elves. This meant that many half-elves might lose their parents tonight. Meg knew how shrewd Sean was. He was even more shrewd than Josh, and as the commander of the border army, his murderous aura was more intense than Josh's, and his methods were also more vicious. Soon, Meg and the others came to a courtyard in the north of the city. It's here. The square-faced man in black said weakly. The pain that came from his body made him almost unable to speak. The torment of not being able to live and not being able to die had already caused his will to collapse. There are 3 people left behind. There's a cellar, and there are 4 children inside. Irina narrowed her eyes slightly, and then turned to look at Meg. She calmly said, "I want to kill." This was not a request, but a very calm statement. Meg had no reason to refuse. These 4 children meant that 4 innocent couples might be killed, and half of them were elves. Those children became orphans just because they were about the same age as Amy. Meg twisted the neck of the man in black in his hand, and casually threw him into the courtyard. He nodded slightly, and said, "They do deserve to die." The sound of the corpse falling into the courtyard attracted the attention of the men in black who were left behind. But before they could do anything, they were suppressed by a terrifying aura and were unable to move. Irina and Meg landed in the courtyard, and pulled out the 3 men in black who were hiding in various places. When they saw Irina, there was already fear in the eyes of these men in black. It was just that their bodies were no longer under their control, and they couldn't even kill themselves. "Where are the others?" Irina asked coldly. "Kill us," one of the men in black said with difficulty with a fierce look on his face. Bam! A wooden chair exploded on his head, and brain matter and blood splattered on the faces of the 2 men in black next to him. There was some fear in the eyes of the 2 men in black. Although they had undergone professional training, the fear of death was instinctive. "Where are the others?" Irina looked at the 2 men in black and asked again. We don't know," one of the men in black said with a fearful voice. The broken and rough wooden handle pierced his eyes, and he screamed immediately. "You don't know either?" Irina asked coldly as she looked at the last man in black. They went to capture those half-elves according to the list," the man in black said with a trembling voice. "Where is the name list?" Meg asked. It's. The black-clothed man gained some space to move. His trembling hand reached into his bosom and suddenly sped up. He pulled out a red iron ball and threw it into the air. However, he was underestimating Meg and Irina by playing tricks in front of 2 10th-rank experts. The moment he threw the metal ball, the kitchen knife flashed and cut it into countless metal pieces. The light that flashed was also cut by the kitchen knife. Irina stomped him into the ground and walked toward the cellar. Meg finished off the man in black who was still screaming and followed Irina to the cellar. Mother! Mother! The secret cellar was opened, and the children's cries came from the dark cellar. Irina paused in her footsteps and hesitated for a moment. Then, a ball of warm light appeared on her fingertips and slowly descended into the cellar. She also jumped in. The cellar was dark and damp, and it seemed to have been dug recently. The passage was only big enough for one person to pass through, and it was more than 5 meters deep. After entering the ground, it suddenly became wider. It was like a smaller version of an underground prison. The only difference was that the cages here were small. They were stacked on top of each other, like small dog cages. In the small cages in the corner, there were already children in 4 of them. Hearing the noise, the crying of the children suddenly stopped. They curled up in the corner, shivering. They didn't even dare to sob. The wounds on their dirty and tattered clothes could be seen. Meg only took a glance at it, and his heart was already burning with rage. These children were about the same age as Amy, but they had suffered such an undeserved calamity. They had been captured here and subjected to inhumane torture. Irina waved her hand to remove the chains on the door and opened the iron chains of the cages. The soft light illuminated the small cages. "Children, don't be afraid. I've beaten the bad guys away. I'm here to take you home," Irina said gently to the children in the cages. The soft light and gentle voice made the children muster up the courage to look outside. After a slight hesitation, they ran out of the cages and threw themselves into Irina's arms, crying. "All right, it's fine now. I'll take you home." Irina comforted them softly. She used life magic to heal their injuries and put them to sleep. "What should we do now?" Irina asked Meg. "Send out all the night elves above level 5 to protect the half-elves in the city." Meg looked at the children sleeping peacefully, and his voice turned cold. "I'll go find Sean." "I'll go with you." Irina got up. Meg shook his head. "No, you should go protect them. You can find those men in black quickly. The more groups you find, the fewer tragedies there will be." Irina pondered for a moment before nodding. "Slash him one more time for me." "All right." Meg nodded and turned to leave the cellar. Meg didn't go straight to the city lord's castle. Instead, he went to the textile factory not far away. Z, who had recently moved to the textile factory from outside the city, sensed something and quickly flew out. Z, go to the city lord's castle, Meg said coldly as he flipped onto Z's back. Z flapped its wings and flew towards the city lord's castle at a low altitude. The joint investigation was not over yet. As the representative of the Roth Empire, Sean was staying in the residence arranged by the city lord's castle. It was also the safest place in the whole of Chaos City. "Sean, come out and face your death." The purple-striped griffin hovered above the city lord's castle. Meg raised his sword and shouted. His thunderous voice resounded in the city lord's castle. There was a commotion below. In a courtyard, Sean walked out in soft armor, surrounded by a few 10th-tier powerhouses. He looked at Meg, who was sitting on the griffin, and frowned. "Alex, the enemy is right in front of us. Why are you picking a fight?" Chapter 1929. Meg's furious roar woke everyone in the city lord's castle up. The representatives sent by the various races to investigate the Great Old One incident had yet to leave, and were also staying in the guest area. They all came out when they heard the commotion, and wanted to see why Alex came to look for Sean in the middle of the night in a rage. However, when they saw Meg standing on the griffin's back, the powerhouses of the various races had different expressions. They had long heard that Alex might have already stepped into the legendary realm, but he had restrained his aura when they saw him yesterday, so no one felt anything special about him. However, the current Alex was like a sharp sword standing on the griffin's back. His terrifying aura made them, who were also 10th-tier powerhouses, fearful. No wonder he could kill Weston with a flying sword. Alex might have really stepped into the legendary realm, and become the most powerful person on the Norland continent, the goblin representative said with a sigh. Although the powerhouses of the various races did not say anything, they had no objections to the goblin representative's deduction. What's going on now? Why did Alex come here in the middle of the night for no reason? Michael pushed open the window of the study and looked in the direction of the guest area. He frowned, and hurried out in that direction again. The peace conference was imminent, and there was still no clue about the devil's escape from the seal. They could not afford to have any more trouble now. The 10th tier knights and magic casters protecting Sean looked at Meg with extremely grave expressions. Their hands were already on their long swords, and their magic casters' staffs were also raised high. They even started to chant the guiding incantation silently. After Josh's ear was sliced off with a sword, they no longer dared to have any misjudgments or fantasies about Alex. He was no longer the great general of the Roth Empire. If he dared to slice off Josh's ear and threaten him with death in front of everyone, then he would dare to do the same thing to Sean. Among the 10th tier knights, a few were from the military, and had more or less interacted with Alex before. However, the current Alex gave them the feeling that he was even more invincible. Even if they had 4 10th tier knights and 2 10th tier great magic casters, they still could not guarantee that they could stop him. Sean looked at Meg and frowned. He could guess the reason for Alex's anger, but he was thinking about whether his men had succeeded in capturing Alex's daughter. Otherwise, why would Alex be so furious and even directly kill his way to the City Lord's mansion? This was the City Lord's castle of Chaos City. He was the representative of the Roth Empire, and also the first prince of the Roth Empire. He was the prince who was most likely to become the future king of the Roth Empire. Chaos City definitely wouldn't sit back and watch Alex make a move on him. Thinking of this, his heart calmed down a little. Sean looked at Meg and solemnly said, "Alex, you were originally the Northwestern General of the Roth Empire. Before I came, Royal Father even asked me to." Looking at Sean's face, Meg couldn't help but think of the 4 pitiful half-elf girls in the cellar. Yet, he was still here pretending that nothing had happened, and still wanted to play the old friendship card with him. Bullshit! Meg roared angrily, and pulled out the Tian-Du sword on his back. Lightning flashed across the surface of the Tian-Du sword, and let out a thunderous roar. Meg took a step forward, and turned into a shadow, and instantly appeared in front of Sean and the rest. "Protect His Highness." The knight standing at the front of the group let out an angry roar and took a step forward to stand in front of Shaoen. He drew his long sword from its scabbard and slashed forward with a solemn expression. A red sword projection stretched out for 7 feet and rippled through the void. 2 knights dashed forward from the side, and also unsheathed their long swords to stab Meg. The last knight stood in front of Sean with his sword, and was not in a hurry to go forward. At the same time, the 2 great magic casters had finished channeling their magic. A water domain enveloped Meg, and slowed him down. At the same time, the ground wriggled, and a pair of giant stone hands reached out from the ground to grab Meg's feet. In the blink of an eye, Sean's bodyguards had already reacted. 6 10th tier powerhouses attacked Meg at the same time. Moreover, they cooperated well, and their methods complemented each other. Obviously, they had practiced the joint attack in advance just to deal with Alex. All the powerhouses from the various races widened their eyes. They all wanted to see how strong Alex was now, and whether he could break out of the encirclement in the face of 6 10th tier powerhouses. Sean took a step back, and also looked at Alex coldly. These 6 10th tier powerhouses were carefully selected by the king, and designed a joint attack for them. Although they had only been working together for a short time, it should not be a problem for them to protect one person. Sean was very clear that the purpose of his trip was not only to investigate the Devil's incident, but also to have 2 more important missions. One was to find out Alex's weakness, and the other was to test Alex's strength. If he could not even break through a 6-man battle formation that he had not familiarized himself with, then his threat would become insignificant. There were more than 10 10th tier powerhouses guarding the Roth Empire's royal palace at all times, not to mention the backup plans that the king had left behind. Even if Alex really became a god, there would still be a limit. The joint attack had already been formed, and Sean's lips curled into a mocking smile. Although Alex had become stronger, he still could not change his arrogant character of underestimating his enemies back then, and stepped into the trap that was prepared for him so easily. The appearance of the water domain made Meg feel as if he had sunk into the deep sea instantly. The terrifying pressure and substantial heaviness made Meg's speed drop significantly. The giant rock hands under the ground had already started to close, and were about to grab his feet. At the same time, the long swords coming from 3 directions were also showing their sharpness. That's it. There was no trace of panic on Meg's face. Instead, he smiled contemptuously, and then raised his sword to slash forward. The water domain was slashed open by the sword, and shattered instantly. Meg's slightly stagnant body suddenly sped up, and he stepped over that giant rock hand that was flashing with black light. He flipped his long sword, and held it horizontally in front of him. Lightning flashed, accompanied by a loud clap of thunder, and swept forward like a huge stone slab. The 3 knights who were thrusting their swords over had a change of expression. However, the momentum of their swords had already disappeared, and they had no way to retreat. They could only brace themselves and stab at that giant long sword that was sweeping towards them. Bam! With a dull thud, the 3 of them felt a terrifying force coming from the sword. The long sword bent into a terrifying arc, and then broke completely. The broad long sword returned, and slapped the 3 of them away with a backhand. The front was instantly emptied, leaving only a level 10 knight with a shocked expression and Sean whose expression had changed greatly. The knight drew his sword. Meg also drew his sword. The long sword broke. The knight slowly knelt on the ground with the heavy sword on his shoulder, spat out a mouthful of blood, and fell to the ground unconscious. Sean wanted to retreat, but the heavy sword had already been raised and pointed at his throat. Sean's half-step back froze in an instant. The remaining 2 great mages' incantations also suddenly stopped. Within the range of the sword, it was Alex's absolute domain. No one could be faster than him. End of chapter. Chapter 1930. The combined attack of 6 10th-tier powerhouses was broken by Alex's sword. Everyone was silent as they looked at Sean, who had a sword pointed at his throat. The powerhouses and representatives of the various races could not hide their shock. If the battle with the devil was said to be because of the rumbling thunder, no one could see the situation inside the seal clearly. Killing Weston with a flying sword and taking Josh's ear in the crowd was also a little unexpected. But today, Alex was facing 6 10th-tier powerhouses who came prepared and learned the combined attack technique for him. But they still could not stop Alex. They were completely defeated before they could even display their true abilities as 10th-tier powerhouses. Sean looked at that familiar heavy sword. It was only a few inches away from his throat. Although the heavy sword had no edge, Sean felt an unprecedented threat of death. Tian Du's sword did not kill nameless people. The number of 10th-tier powerhouses who had died under this heavy sword was already in the double digits. Many of them were famous people on the Norland continent. Sean's Adam's apple bobbed. He looked at Meg, and tried his best to be calm as he said, "You can't kill me." Yes, he couldn't, didn't dare. There was no one in this world that Alex and Irina didn't dare to kill. Everyone understood this when the 2 of them became famous on the Norland continent. "As long as I want to, I can kill a god for you to see," Meg said coldly as he looked at him. "I am not a god, but I know that if I die, the Roth Empire's cavalry will gallop on the Norland continent in 2 days. The racial war will start again, and many people will die with me." Sean looked straight into Meg's eyes. "You know very well that my father is not someone who can be threatened." Meg frowned slightly under his mask. He knew that Sean was not lying. Although Andre Edward was not the founding emperor of the Roth Empire, he could be said to be the most pragmatic and capable emperor in the history of the Roth Empire. In just a few decades of hard work, He made the Roth Empire a super empire with millions of cavalry and a considerable number of magic casters. Such a far-sighted emperor would not stop his goal of accumulating power for decades just because of the threat of a strong person. Half a step into divinity was ultimately not a true divinity. Even now, Meg was not confident that he could enter the Imperial Palace and kill Andre. Since Andre sent you to Chaos City at this time to provoke me, it seems like you're not his first choice. Even if I kill you, do you really think he'll go against the entire world for you? Meg asked with a cold smile. His long sword was almost at Sean's throat. A drop of blood slid down Sean's throat. Fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his breathing became more rapid. Alex. If you hurt His Highness, you will become the enemy of the Roth Empire. You have to think carefully. The 10th tier knight who had been sent flying got up, and looked at Meg nervously. The powerhouses of the Roth Empire were all looking at Meg anxiously. If anything happened to Sean, they would be implicated and punished for failing to protect him. The various representatives did not say anything. Although Alex had already left the Roth Empire, this could only be considered an internal matter of the Roth Empire. It was not their place to interfere. Alex, no. At this moment, a slightly anxious voice sounded from afar. In the blink of an eye, Michael was already in front of him. Michael looked at Meg, who was pointing his sword at Sean, and stopped 3 meters away. He gestured with his hands, and said, "Let's talk nicely. Put down your sword slowly. Let's talk first." He had thought that Meg was only there to scare Sean. However, when he saw the Roth Empire's 10th tier knights lying on the ground, and Sean's neck being slit, he realized that things were not as simple as he had thought. Although he felt that Alex had become more humane after becoming Mr. Mac, no one would suspect that he was still that cold-blooded dragon-slaying warrior after putting on the mask. Sean was indeed not a good person, but if he were to die here today, there would be no peace talks. The resumption of the war was a foregone conclusion. However, it was still uncertain whether it would be a racial war that would engulf the entire continent or a local war between a few races. As the host, he could only bite the bullet and be the peacemaker at this time. Sean heaved an obvious sigh of relief when he saw Michael's arrival. Meg glanced at Michael before turning to Sean. He said in a low voice, "Get them to leave Chaos City immediately. You know who I'm talking about." Sean could feel that the longsword had no intention of moving away. Alex's gaze under the mask was cold and resolute. It was as if he could cut his throat like a piece of wood at any time. After a moment of silence, Sean said, "Get them to leave." A knight in black, who was standing at the back, put away his long sword, took out a bamboo tube, and slapped it at the sky. A beam of dark red light flew into the sky, making a hurried sound, and then exploded in the sky. A dark red skeleton appeared in the sky for a short 3 seconds, and then disappeared. "They will all leave Chaos City in 15 minutes, Sean said to Meg. "Don't try to cross my bottom line, and don't try to infuriate me. Otherwise, you will regret being born," Meg said coldly. "I'm a little curious now. Have they found their real target?" Sean stared into Meg's eyes. "Rip." Meg put away his sword, and an arm flew into the air with blood. After the arm flew into the air, Ozzy spat out a ball of lightning, and blasted the arm into black powder. Shaoan let out a blood-curdling scream as he fell backwards, his face deathly pale. "Your Highness." The people from the Roth Empire rushed forward in a panic. That water-type magic caster hurriedly used healing magic to stop Sean's bleeding. His eyelids twitched as he looked at the arm that was only left with half a charred bone. Now, even the most powerful magic caster would not be able to regrow a severed limb. "I've said it before. Don't try to cross my bottom line. This arm is for those children. As for your life, keep it for now." I hope that the next time you see me, there will be more than these 6 useless people around you, Meg said coldly as he put away his sword and turned around. The purple-striped griffin swooped down, and Meg leaped onto the griffin's back. Then, he rose into the air and disappeared into the horizon. 2 princes, 2 princes. How strange, how strange. One has no ears, and the other has no arms. How strange. Louis hummed a tune as he turned and went back into the house. The various representatives also went back to sleep with different expressions. This strange battle made them realize 2 things: the Roth Empire was indeed rich, and Alex was really strong. "Aw Z, get out of the city and fly around it," Meg said coldly as he patted Aw Z. Chapter 1931. Sean couldn't be killed tonight. This was something that Meg already knew before he entered the Lord's castle. It was the eve of the peace conference, and the giant dragons chose to stand on the side of peace. Under the mediation of Chaos City, the goblins, dwarves, and the orc tribes led by the Fog tribe would all stand up to renew the peace treaty. The most important thing now was to make André sign the peace treaty and extend the Norland continent's peace for another 100 years. Cutting off one of Josh's ears was still within André's acceptable range. He could even pretend that nothing had happened and invite him to meet. However, if Sean, who was representing the Roth Empire, died in Chaos City, André would have a legitimate reason to deploy his troops. The Roth Empire's million-strong cavalry would only have Chaos City as their first target. Meg couldn't let the millions of innocent citizens in Chaos City suffer because of him. Even if he wanted to kill Sean, he could only do it outside Chaos City, and draw a clean line between this matter and Chaos City. As for that arm, it was a little interest that Meg had collected. He wanted to let Sean and everyone else know that those who tried to provoke him would have to pay the price, even if he was the first prince of the Roth Empire. "Captain, it's the signal to retreat. Let's go. Leave the city immediately." "But that child might be inside, obey the order." "Yes." In Chaos City, all the black figures saw the dark red skeleton exploding in the direction of the city lord's castle. They all gave up on their target, and started to retreat out of the city. To the Black Falcons who were good at stealth, although the city walls of Chaos City were tall, it wasn't difficult for them to climb over the walls and leave as long as they knew the patrolling pattern of the Grey Temple. On the city walls, the Grey Temple's patrolling team had just left when a flying claw latched onto the top of the wall. 5 men in black grabbed the rope and climbed up the city walls that were dozens of meters high in no time. Then, they fixed the flying claw on the other side of the city wall, and slid down the rope one after another. Crack! A sudden clap of thunder sounded, and a bolt of silver lightning struck under the terrified gazes of the men in black. The rope broke instantly. Before they could even scream, they were struck by the lightning and turned into charcoal. They fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Why is there thunder all of a sudden? The Grey Temple's scout turned to look at the sky in confusion. "Did you hear any strange sounds when there was thunder?" someone asked in a low voice. "No, it's just that the thunder is a little loud." The scouts discussed for a while and did not notice a huge figure in the sky. Under the cover of the night, it quietly slipped past the city. That night, a series of thunderclaps sounded in Chaos City. Lightning flashed outside the city, causing people to sleep restlessly. City Lord's mansion, in a room. As Sean listened to the rumbling thunder, his remaining hand clenched into a fist. His pale face became even more unsightly. He gritted his teeth and said, "Damn you, Alex." It could be predicted that the Black Eagle that he had painstakingly cultivated for many years would have been completely destroyed tonight. This was one of his biggest trump cards in the fight for the throne. Alex had destroyed all of them, which was tantamount to cutting off one of his arms. How could he not hate him? Let's go. It's time for us to head back. Meg patted Ozzy's back as he glanced at the last charred corpse that was gradually dying out. Ozzy flapped its wings and flew into the clouds to enter the city. It placed Mag in the no man's land in Aiden Square, and rubbed its head in front of Mag to act coquettishly. It only flew back to the textile factory happily after Mag promised that he would bring it delicious food the next day. Meg returned to the restaurant. Irina was already in the restaurant. She turned to Meg when she heard the sound, and said, "I have sent the children to the textile factory. Someone will take care of them." Meg took off his mask, and looked at Irina as he said, "I didn't kill Sean. I only cut off one of his arms. I killed all the men in black." That's equivalent to cutting off both of his arms. That's some interest. Irina nodded with a smile, and said, "That's good. I was worried that you would kill him too quickly, and I wouldn't even have a chance to do anything. Next time, let's go straight to Rodu and settle all the scores with the father and son." "All right." Meg also nodded with a smile. Rest early. In the city lord's castle, Michael's study was still brightly lit. He had just received a few urgent reports on his desk. One of them was a report on the rumbling thunder outside Chaos City tonight. The Great Temple's inspectors found hundreds of charred corpses that were suspected to have been struck by lightning outside the city. Due to the severe burns, they couldn't identify them. Another report was about the brutal murders that happened in the city tonight. Many couples were found dead in their homes, and they all had a common characteristic. They were human and elf couples, and they all had a 3 or 4-year-old half-elf daughter. At the scene of the murder, the half-elf daughter was nowhere to be found. Combined with the fact that Alex suddenly appeared at the city lord's castle in a rage and almost killed Sean, Michael had a rough idea. "Bastard!" Michael smashed the desk with a palm. He was so angry that his body was shaking. He picked up the long sword hanging on the wall, and was about to leave. "City Lord, what are you going to do?" Dykes asked. "To kill that brat Sean," Michael said in a low voice. "Please calm down first. What's going on now? You were just persuading Alex to be magnanimous." Dykes quickly stopped him, afraid that Michael would do something stupid in a moment of impulse. "If I knew Sean had sent people to kill the citizens of Chaos City, I would have stabbed him with my sword, not to mention persuading him," Michael said angrily. "You're saying that the murders tonight were ordered by Sean?" Dykes was shocked when he heard that. He quickly understood the cause and effect of the matter, and also couldn't hide his anger. However, he still persuaded, "My lord, Lord Alex has already cut off Sean's arm, and made those hundreds of murderers pay with their lives for those innocent citizens who died. If you kill Sean now, the Roth Empire will definitely send their troops down south. It's the eve of the peace conference, so please think about the big picture." Michael looked at Dykes, and was silent for a while. He threw his long sword on the ground, and gravely said, "Get the Great Temple to investigate this matter. We must prove with absolute evidence that this was ordered by Sean. He killed the citizens of Chaos City wantonly, so he can't be allowed to leave Chaos City easily. It won't make any difference even if he's the prince of the Roth Empire." "Yes," Dykes said seriously, and turned to leave quickly. Michael looked in the direction of the guest area with a dark expression, and coldly said, "You brat Sean. Andre won't teach you how to behave, so let me, Michael, teach you." Chapter 1932. It was destined that many people would not be able to sleep peacefully tonight. Meg stood by the window of the study, and looked at the quiet square outside. Similarly, he did not feel sleepy for a long time. Although he had been working hard ever since he came to this world, from a cripple who couldn't even lift a finger, to a demigod who was the best in terms of one-on-one combat ability, he still had to work hard. However, he still felt a little powerless in front of those truly powerful beings. He wanted to give Amy and a future where they could grow up peacefully, and not be forced to wander around in the midst of war. If he was given another 100 years, he believed he could bring about some different changes to this world. The rise of Chaos City proved that it was not impossible for all races to integrate and coexist peacefully. As long as all parties consciously pushed for it, the Norland continent might really be unified, and the possibility of another racial war breaking out would be eliminated. And now, the most important thing was to push for the signing of the peace treaty to extend the Norland continent's peace for another 100 years. Meg turned back to his desk, and took out a pen and paper to write down a few names. He frowned as he started to sort out the current situation. The Roth Empire was the strongest catfish in the fish pond that was the Norland continent. Apart from the giant dragons and the demon islands that were located above the boundless sea realm, no other species would be a match for the Roth Empire. Wherever they pointed their weapons, it would only be a one-sided war. After the Night Elves' betrayal incident, the elves' power was greatly reduced, and they were having a headache because of the worsening internal divisions. It was already difficult for them to protect themselves, not to mention initiating a racial war. However, the elves had been very close to the Roth Empire all these years. If Andre promised Helena some benefits, she might follow the Roth Empire. The orcs and the Roth Empire had been enemies for generations. Their overall power was very strong, but they were currently divided into two factions. The faction led by the August tribe and the faction led by the Falk tribe were evenly matched. After Oster lost an arm, their ability to invade the outside world was limited. Originally, the strength of the demon race was only below that of the dragon race. However, after Meg and Irina stirred things up, the internal division of the demon race was even more serious than that of the beastmen race. The war between the abyss demon race and the flame demon race had yet to end. The various races could not work together, so they did not have the ability to fight together. The forest trolls had always kept a low profile. Their racial advantage was only below that of the giant dragons. Their individual strength was generally strong, but there weren't many of them. Although there were rumors of them forming an alliance with the Roth Empire, given their reclusive personality, it was unknown if they would really form an alliance with the Roth Empire. The goblins had always been developing in the underground caverns. Their strength hadn't increased much in the past 100 years, and they were still ranked at the bottom among the various races. They had already allied with Chaos City, and they also supported the renewal of the peace treaty. The catacombs, which had been in operation for many years, were easy to defend and difficult to attack. They had already formed a complete underground world. Even if a racial war broke out, they would still have decent self-defense capabilities. The dwarves relied on their skills to take up a large proportion of the weapons and infrastructure market. They had earned a lot in the past 100 years, so they were naturally the supporters of peace. They could be considered to be on the same side as Chaos City and the elves. As for the dragons, whose overall strength was the strongest, although many giant dragon races led by Lewis and Douglas had announced the renewal of the peace treaty with Chaos City, the giant dragons weren't completely united internally. There were still a few of the top 10 dragon races that hadn't made a statement, so their attitudes were unknown. The dragons occupied the most fertile land on the Dragon Island and the Norland continent. Once the racial war started, would they really stand on the same side as Chaos City and fight the Roth Empire head-on? That was a question worth pondering. If it wasn't for the sudden appearance of the Great Old One, the giant dragons on the Dragon Island might not even care about who would rule the world below the Dragon Island. There were no eternal friends, only absolute benefits. This sentence was also applicable to the various races on the Norland continent. Meg did a serious calculation. Apart from himself, there was only Lantish left. The relationship with the Moon Nation that was barely maintained by Barbara wasn't actually stable. After all, Barbara didn't know about his other identity, and couldn't possibly involve the Moon Nation in the fight for benefits on the Norland continent. Lantist's relationship with him was relatively stable because he had helped them remove the seal. He could guarantee that Lantist would stand on his side during crucial times. As for Irina's night elves, that group of elves belonged to the bottom rung of the Wind Forest, so they were actually more suitable for work. It was actually a very shameful thing to count them as combat power. Currently, it seemed that the Roth Empire, who was in charge of the war, was very aggressive. The scale of the peace alliance wasn't small, but it still needed to be tested if they were united. The biggest change was the forest trolls and the demons. No matter which of these two giants sided with the Roth Empire, the situation would take a very bad turn. The forest trolls' current commander is Bruno. Perhaps I should go and meet him before the peace conference starts. Meg drew a circle on the forest trolls, and his vision gradually became clearer. The Roth Empire was strong, and Chaos City, the goblins, dwarves, and other races were weak. Why not use the strategy of alliance? Now that Chaos City, the goblins, and the dwarves had basically formed an alliance, Meg could bring Lantist into the alliance. With the Peace Alliance led by the Fog Tribe, and the Giant Dragons led by the Golden Dragon Tribe and the Frost Dragon Tribe, as well as the Giant Dragons led by the Golden Dragon Tribe and the Frost Dragon Tribe, as long as they could reach an official alliance contract before the peace conference, they could use it as a heavy bargaining chip in the negotiation with the Roth Empire. Seems like there are also strategists in the City Lord's castle, but they aren't thorough enough. A loose alliance can be easily broken by benefits. I have to let the various races make a choice and sign a more binding treaty. Meg took out a pen and paper, and started to write the invitation letter. That night, Meg made a low-profile trip to the City Lord's castle again. He had a long talk with Michael in the middle of the night for an hour, and finally came to an agreement to set up an official peace alliance before the peace conference. The treaty that the three of you signed is a little too petty. Meg put down the document in his hand, and took out a new one. This is the treaty that I drafted. We should make a big fuss about the devils now, and compare it to the crisis of the entire Norland continent. We should push the various races to put aside their disputes and deal with the devils together, instead of wasting our strength in the racial war and giving the devils an opportunity to take advantage of us. Michael looked through it seriously, and his eyes gradually lit up. He couldn't help but praise, "Brilliant." He took the document and said to Meg, "Let's use this as a model. I will get someone to draft an official treaty right away." "That's good too. But this matter has to be pushed out quickly. We don't have much time left." Meg nodded. "All right. Lewis and Douglas are both here, and the representatives from the various races also have some say. I will gather them together tomorrow to discuss this matter." Michael nodded. He knew the importance of this treaty. Once it was signed, the one who would have a headache would be Andre. No pop-up window. Chapter 1933. Meg went home and had a good night's sleep. It was a dreamless night. The next morning, he woke up early as usual to prepare breakfast for everyone. "I went to look for Michael last night," Meg said to Irina during breakfast. "I thought you went to meet some lady secretly behind my back," Irina said softly after taking a sip of soy milk. "How is that possible?" "I don't have the guts either." Meg raised his eyebrows. It seemed like she knew very well about him going out. "I know that." Irina nodded. "Meg, tell me, what did you do when you met Michael in the middle of the night last night?" Irina asked Meg. "What do you mean by meeting privately?" "It's called business," Meg corrected. Regarding the matter of forming a peace alliance with all the tribes, I've drafted a treaty for him." I'll let Chaos City, the goblins, the dwarves, the giant dragons, and the peaceful tribes led by the Fog tribes sign it together to form a binding alliance. Meg said, moreover, I'm going to have a talk with Bruno from the Forest Trolls to find out the Forest Trolls' tendencies. This is more reliable than their verbal promises. It'll save us the trouble of saying one thing and doing another when the time comes. Irina nodded, and continued, however, Bruno, this big fellow, looks silly, but he's actually more cunning than anyone else. I'm afraid it's not very realistic for you to try to get information out of him. I had an arranged battle with Bruno over 3 years ago, but it was put on hold because of that incident. I think it's just right to restart it now. I think he'll be able to say some things more clearly during the battle. Meg's smile had a hint of coldness. The Forest Troll's hands weren't short at all during that rainy night and the ambush against you in Rhoda previously. That's good. Irina looked at Meg with admiration. Why don't I go with you? One of us needs to participate in the negotiation of the contract. You need to stay. Meg shook his head slightly. Because he had to go on a long trip, today's business could only be cancelled. Meg prepared breakfast for Mia and the others, and then posted the notice on the door. He waited for them to arrive at the restaurant before leaving through the back door. Meg brought Ozzy an early roasted goat and waited for him to finish eating before they set off. The Forest Trolls' territory was located in the southwest of the Norland continent. The ancient forest was their birthplace, and it was also their favorite habitat. After flying for about an hour, a vast forest appeared in Meg's sight. Trees that were more than 100 meters tall could be seen everywhere. Ancient trees that were hundreds of meters tall were like giants standing among the countless trees. The humid climate caused the ancient trees to be covered with moss and all kinds of creepers, making them look even more ancient. The chirping of insects and birds could be heard incessantly, and all kinds of magic beasts could be seen traversing through the forest from time to time. They were much bigger than in other places, and even the birds and beasts seemed to be compatible with this forest. The Forest Trolls didn't have a fixed residence. Even their leader, Bruno, didn't have a fixed residence. If Meg wanted to find him, he would have to try his luck in this vast forest. Roar, a tragic bestial roar sounded from afar, startling a flock of birds. Got it. Meg's eyes lit up. Ozzy understood tacitly, and flew in the direction of the bestial roar. After a short while, a patch of collapsed trees appeared in their sight. And in the center of that mess, a forest troll that was more than 30 meters tall had its knee on the neck of a chimpanzee, and was tearing off the chimpanzee's arm and stuffing it into its mouth. That chimpanzee was also more than 10 meters tall, but it was like a little monkey in front of that forest troll. It had no ability to resist at all, and could only struggle helplessly as it was eaten. Meg didn't feel much pity when he saw this scene from high up in the air. That diamond ape wasn't a benevolent creature either, and was an extremely aggressive magical beast. If it had met an ordinary human here today, then the one being toyed with and eaten would only be that human. However, he wasn't in the mood to sit here and watch a forest troll eat. He had Ozzy descend a bit, and at the same time released the frightening aura of a level 10 magical beast. The forest troll felt the frightening aura from above and lifted its head to look up with some alarm. The diamond ape that had one of its arms torn off also stopped howling and lay on the ground, trembling. The absolute bloodline suppression of a level 10 magical beast rendered it unable to move. I'm Alex, where is Bruno? Meg looked down at the forest troll from above and asked in a cold voice. Alex. The fear in the forest troll's eyes deepened. As a level 6 forest troll, he was naturally no stranger to Alex's name. He didn't know why Alex had appeared here, and even less why he was looking for the leader. However, he was well aware that if he didn't speak, he would likely be killed on the spot. Alex didn't even need to make a move. Just his famous purple-striped griffin would be enough to easily kill him. The leader is in the center of the forest, I don't know his specific location. The forest troll stood up and pointed in the southeast direction. Let's go, Ozzy. Meg didn't expect that a forest troll from the outskirts of the forest would be able to help him find Bruno. He patted Ozzy and flew in the direction the forest troll had pointed. The forest grew increasingly dense, and ancient trees several hundred meters tall could be seen everywhere. Beneath the luxuriant trees was a forest heavy with energy, and the occasional roar of beasts could be heard. This was forest troll territory, but it was also a paradise for magical beasts. It was said that level 10 magical beasts would occasionally appear here, and were the forest troll's greatest natural enemy. Meg felt the auras of several rather powerful magical beasts, all around level 8 or 9. Magical beasts of this level were rarely seen in other places. Moreover, the strength of the forest trolls increased as they approached the center of the forest. Level 10. Meg looked at the dense trees below and suddenly had Ozzy stop, no longer concealing his presence at the same time. After a short 3 breaths, 100-meter-tall forest troll broke through the trees on both sides and scurried out, staring at the sky with a pair of dark green eyes. Alex! The forest troll let out a startled roar. Where is Bruno? Meg looked at him and asked lowly. The forest troll quickly regained his composure after a brief moment of panic and looked at Meg with some vigilance. Alex, this is forest troll territory, why have you come here? Why are you looking for our leader? I made a promise to fight with Bruno that year, and stood up for 3 years. I've come today to fulfill my promise. Meg said loudly, his voice spreading through the forest. Chapter 1934. Meg's voice was like rolling thunder as it spread far and wide in the forest. The trolls and beasts below were all trembling in fear. They didn't dare to speak as they were suppressed by the terrifying presence in the air. The recent rumors about Alex had spread all over the Norland continent. The trolls below had also heard about how he summoned lightning to battle the demons and killed Weston with his flying sword. Now that they saw his terrifying aura, they didn't dare to underestimate him. However, Bruno hadn't told them what to do if Alex came looking for them. Now that he had come looking for them, they didn't know how to deal with him. This was the forest troll's territory, after all. If they didn't respond, it would be a little weak. However, if they accepted his challenge, they didn't know if Bruno really had the ability to fight him. Seeing that the surroundings were quiet, Meg sneered, and said, Bruno, are you going to be a coward in your own territory? Alex, don't talk nonsense. At this moment, an angry roar came from the forest in the distance. The trees fell to the sides, and a 200-meter-tall super troll ran over with large strides. The ground shook violently, and the beasts ran to the sides in panic. That was a dark green troll. He wore thick leather armor like the bark of an ancient tree. He was also holding a black stone club that was close to 200 meters long in his hand. The stone club had a thick end and a thin end. Its surface was rough, and there were dark bloodstains all over it. It could be considered a peerless weapon. Meg looked at the forest troll charging over with the stone club, and narrowed his eyes. This was the forest troll's number 1 powerhouse, Bruno. He was also their leader. They were both 10th tier trolls, but his aura was much stronger than that of the 10th tier forest troll below. He was close to the level of Lewis and Douglas. He was one of the most powerful beings on the Norland continent. The forest trolls' huge bodies gave them many unique physical talents like giant dragons. Their strength was very shocking. Bruno stopped 500 meters away. His dark eyes looked at Meg, who was standing on the griffin's back, and he said in a low voice, Alex, what do you want? Today, I'm here to fulfill the promise that I failed to fulfill 3 years ago, Meg looked at Bruno and said in a flat tone, "Today, we'll decide who's better and who's weaker." Blueno frowned and his eyes flickered. Apparently, he did not expect Meg to make such a request. The level 10 troll's expression also changed slightly. With Alex's current strength, if he were to fight Blueno to the death, Blueno's chances of winning were not high. "Now that the peace conference is about to start, I won't fight with you." "Go back," Bruno said in a deep voice, looking at Meg with some vigilance. "Since I'm here today, there's no reason for me to go back empty-handed. The peace conference has nothing to do with me." Crack! A bolt of lightning flashed in the air. The Tian-Du sword flashed with lightning, as if the heavens were descending. "You're asking for death." Bruno looked at Meg, who had jumped off the griffin's back to face the stone club. A hint of cruelty flashed across his eyes. If he could kill Alex here forever, he would be able to eliminate a huge threat. God-vanquishing club, explode. Bruno let out a furious roar. Streaks of crimson light suddenly lit up on the ordinary-looking black stone staff. The crimson bloodstains on the stone staff transformed into a series of sinister skeletons, giving the stone staff an eerie appearance as it hurtled toward Mag with a trail of crimson light trailing behind it. This god-vanquishing club was the most precious treasure of the forest trolls. It was said that the forest trolls' ancestors had polished it with a piece of natural rock from outer space. It was indestructible. Over the countless years, countless experts had died under this staff. However, the past generations of users had never cleaned the stone staff. Instead, they had deliberately dyed the entire stone staff red with the blood of their opponents. This added a mysterious aura to the stone staff. On the Norland continent's weapon rankings, the God-vanquishing club could be ranked in the top 5. It was a true godly weapon. In front of the giant club that was over 200 meters long, Meg was like an ant holding an embroidery needle. He crashed into it without any hesitation. Chapter 1935. He'll be smashed to death, right? The 10th tier forest demon and the other forest demons who were rushing over all stopped in their tracks and couldn't help but think to themselves. Zeeting got rid of the vines and flew into the sky. She also looked down with concern. The 200-meter-long stone club was like a mountain crashing down on him. This feeling became more and more obvious to Meg as the stone club approached. Those flashing red skeletons were probably the lingering spirits of the powerful beings who had died under the stone club. They could bring some pressure and discomfort to the opponent. However, that was all. Meg's eyes didn't show the slightest sign of cowardice or fear. He raised his sword and slashed down at the stone club. The scene seemed to freeze. The club stopped moving. Meg's sword also stopped moving. It was as if a needle was propping up a huge stone slab. This scene looked a little strange and magical. But this silence only lasted for a short 3 seconds. Crack! Accompanied by a crisp sound, a crack appeared where the sword and the club had come into contact. Then, it spread out at an extremely fast speed. Like a spider web, it quickly covered the entire god-vanquishing staff. This. Bruno's eyes widened as he looked at the crack extending from the club. Bang! With a crisp sound, the 200-meter-long god-vanquishing club was completely shattered, falling to the ground as rocks of various sizes. Those dark red skeletons also vanished into thin air. No! Bruno looked at the handful of rocks left in his hand and let out a roar of grief and indignation. The god-vanquishing club is broken. The forest trolls were also shocked when they saw this. This was the most precious treasure of the forest trolls and also Bruno's weapon. But it was shattered by Alex's sword just like that. This sword had shattered the god-vanquishing club and shattered the confidence of all the forest trolls. They looked at Alex. This seemingly insignificant man was now as dazzling and terrifying as a god. After destroying the god-vanquishing staff with one strike, Meg's body once again descended towards Bruno. The lightning on his longsword grew stronger, making him look like the god of thunder. Blueno took a few steps back and stabilized himself. He looked at Alex, who was once again coming towards him with a sword in his hand. There was a little more fear in his eyes. He roared at the people who had not yet recovered from their shock, "Kill him together." At the same time, he clenched his fist and hammered his own chest. The old bark-like leather armor shook and the sand and moss on its surface faded away, revealing a metallic luster. Bruno reached out and grabbed an ancient tree beside him. He held it with both hands and pulled it up. The ancient tree, which was hundreds of meters tall, was uprooted by him. Then, he swung it at Meg. The forest trolls also came to their senses, brandishing their weapons as they strode toward Bruno. Blueno was defeated, and they naturally couldn't watch him die in the hands of Alex. The towering ancient tree slammed toward Meg with great force. This was the hardest ironwood. It was thousands of years old and was harder than real steel. Meg descended from the sky with his long sword in front of him. He crashed into the ancient tree without dodging. The ironwood, which was harder than steel, was easily cut open from the middle like tofu by the Tiandu sword. Then, the sword chi minced it into sawdust. Not good. Blueno looked at Meg, who was rapidly approaching him like a hot knife through butter. His expression changed drastically. Vines rose from his body in the ground toward Meg, but as soon as they got close, they were minced by the sword chi. They didn't have the slightest effect of hindering him. In the blink of an eye, Meg was already in front of him. Blueno couldn't dodge, and a ferocious look appeared on his face. He threw away the remaining half of the wood in his hand and directly punched at Meg. Golden red gang chi wrapped around his fist as if it had been set ablaze. His entire body was enveloped in a faint golden red light. At this moment, his racial talent and level 10 strength were stimulated to the extreme. Although his weapon was destroyed, his body was his most powerful weapon at this moment. Meg looked at the fist, and a glimmer of light appeared in his eyes. Clang! When the long sword and the fist collided, a sound similar to that of metal striking stone rang out. Meg held the long sword in his hand as he stood upside down in the air. Blueno clenched his fist, and his expression gradually turned ferocious. He tried his best to maintain the golden red gang chi that was about to be extinguished at any moment. You've lost. Meg looked at Blueno, who was gradually struggling, and chuckled. As soon as he said this, the restrained sword chi suddenly burst out. Lightning flashed across the sky, and the gang chi on the fist was suddenly extinguished like a candle flame. Ha! Blueno's eyes widened as he watched his hand being cut into countless pieces by the sword chi, and then shattered just like the previous god-vanquishing rod. Meg let go of the sword, and then the long sword, which was shining with lightning, pierced through his armor and into his heart, and then flew back and fell back into Meg's hand. Z flew down and caught Meg, who had not yet landed on the ground. Blueno only felt that his vitality had been completely sucked away at this moment. His other hand, which was clenched into a fist, fell down powerlessly. His eyes widened, and he slowly knelt on the ground. He looked at Meg, who was standing on the back of the purple-striped griffin, and said in a hoarse voice, Why, 3 years ago, I almost died in the hands of you trolls. 3 months ago, Irina almost died in the hands of you trolls. From the moment you had the idea, you should have known that this day would come sooner or later. Meg stood with his sword and looked at Blueno calmly. Blueno stared fixedly at Meg, and then slowly fell down, completely silent. Blueno is dead. The leader is dead. The charging forest trolls suddenly stopped and looked at the dead Blueno on the ground. Their expressions changed, and they were in an uproar. And besides hatred, they looked at Alex with gazes that were filled with deep fear. Even someone as strong as Blueno had no ability to resist in front of him. My old grudge with the forest trolls is written off today. Meg put away his sword and looked at the 6 rank 10 forest trolls who had gathered. His voice was calm but powerful as he said, "But no matter which one of you becomes the new leader of the forest trolls, I hope that you will sign your name on the peace agreement in 2 days. I love peace. You are threatening us trolls." A rank 10 troll said in grief and indignation. "Yes, this is not a discussion, this is a threat." Meg nodded frankly. After killing Blueno, his threat became even more powerful. The forest trolls could not be compared to the Roth Empire, after all. If he couldn't even suppress this, then he would really be wasting his power as a demigod. The trolls were furious and aggrieved, but looking at Meg and the dead Blueno, they didn't dare to do anything that might anger him. "Let's go, Aw-zee." Meg looked deeply at the trolls again, and left on Aw-zee. Chapter 1936. Suppressing their grief, the trolls buried Bruno. A few 10th tier trolls gathered together to discuss the future of the forest trolls solemnly. The forest trolls were a powerful tribe, at least 100 years ago. In their lifespan of over 1,000 years, 100 years was not considered long. Hence, they still felt that the forest trolls were extremely powerful. However, all of this was completely shattered by Meg's sword. A human, a puny human. A sword had shattered the god-vanquishing rod that had been passed down for countless years, killed the most powerful trolls, Bruno, and shattered their pride. "If we don't take revenge, won't the trolls become the joke of the Norland continent?" a troll said angrily. "How can we take revenge? Bruno is already dead, and the god-vanquishing rod is shattered. Which one of us is a match for Alex? Even if we join forces, we still couldn't kill him 3 years ago, let alone now," a troll said dejectedly. All the trolls were dejected upon hearing that. They had already seen how powerful Alex was. He had the power to crush 10th tier trolls, and they couldn't even think of resisting. "Then, what should we do now?" According to what he said, we have to agree to renew the peace treaty during the peace conference. Otherwise, he will continue to find trouble with us trolls. Bruno used to have a close relationship with the Roth Empire. Now that he's dead, the Roth Empire and Alex are on bad terms. It's just that neither of them can do anything to the other, so we have become their punching bags. Andre is hiding in the Rodu Royal Palace without any worries. However, if we don't do as Alex says, who will be the next to die? Meg flew 1 round around the forest before returning to Chaos City. He had already achieved his goal of killing Bruno. The horn of revenge had been sounded. Since his power had already recovered and improved, there was no reason for him to let those enemies continue to jump around. Bruno had a close relationship with Josh. He was one of the main plotters of that ambush back then. He was also the mastermind who wanted to kill Irina in Rodu a few months ago, triggering the conflict between the Roth Empire and the elves. Under Bruno's leadership, the forest trolls were more inclined towards war. Now that he was dead, coupled with Meg's warning, these big guys would probably make a wise choice. The news of Bruno being killed in the duel with Alex spread like wildfire across the Norland continent, and was delivered to the decision-makers. Alex, the forest troll representative, who had come to participate in the peace talks, let out an angry roar from the conference table. He crushed the letter in his hand. The various representatives also received the news and had different expressions. No one would have thought that Alex, who had just cut off Sean's arm last night, would travel thousands of miles to kill Bruno today. Sean, who had lost an arm, had a gloomy look on his face. The forest trolls were the Roth Empire's ally, and Bruno had already promised to stand by the Roth Empire's side during the peace conference. After the war started, he would join forces with the Roth Empire to conquer the Norland continent. But just as the peace conference was about to begin, Bruno suddenly died in the hands of Alex. The forest troll representative was furious, but he restrained himself. Obviously, the news he had received already included the forest troll's decision. Alex cut off my arm last night, and today, he killed the forest troll leader, Bruno, for no reason. How is he different from the devil? Sean stood up and said to the various representatives present, "We shouldn't be sitting here today talking about how to exterminate the devil. Instead, we should be thinking about how to subdue Alex, who has lost control, so that we can protect our own lives." Sean is right. Ever since Alex appeared again, he has been acting strangely and killing people like flies. Just the number of 10th-tier powerhouses from various races who have died in his hands is already more than double digits. Every race should work together to kill such a vicious person. The elven representative, Elliot, said with a serious expression. "We, the horror demons, also feel that Alex should be punished. His actions are very different from before. I'm afraid he has already been controlled by the devil. We should get rid of him as soon as possible," the horror demons representative said. The atmosphere became a little strange. Many people looked at Irina, who was sitting at the side. Irina smiled disdainfully, and was about to say something. "Sean, you should know very well why your arm was cut off. Alex's actions were already very restrained. If anyone dares to lay a hand on my daughter, I will definitely take his life, and not just his arm." Michael looked at Sean coldly, and said, "Of course, he can't lay a hand on the residents of Chaos City either." Sean felt as if he was being stared at by a ferocious beast, and instinctively averted his gaze. As for Bruno's death, according to the report I received, they were engaged in a duel that was agreed upon 3 years ago. It was a duel to determine who was stronger, and also to determine who would die. Michael looked at the forest troll's representative. "As for the personal feud between them, I'm sure you know very well whether it can be brought out in public." That forest troll's representative clenched his fists when he heard that, but he still avoided Michael's gaze. He knew very well the cause of this duel, what kind of role the forest trolls played in that ambush, and why Alex would kill Bruno. There was a reason for all of that. The elves have internal conflicts, so we shouldn't interfere. However, those who kill will be killed. This principle has never changed. Michael looked at Elliot with a cold smile, and said, "I will tell you elves why Chaos City accepted the night elves into the city today. It's because I feel that you are not being kind." Elliot's face changed between green and red, and he didn't know how to refute all of a sudden. As for the Fear Demon tribe, what happened that day happened in front of all the representatives of the various races. All the representatives present witnessed the whole story. How can you say that they are evil? Michael looked at that Fear Demon tribe's representative again with a serious expression. Alex disregarded his own life to guide the lightning to help reseal that demon and avert a disaster for the Norland continent. How can he be so unbearable in your words? That Fear Demon was rendered speechless, and lowered his head unhappily. Irina looked at Michael with admiration. She didn't expect him to be able to render these people speechless. That saved her some effort and arguing. Michael stood up, and said to the representatives of the various races, "Let's call it a day. I have already asked their princess to send an invitation to the Moon Nation. We can only wait for their news now." Chapter 1937. Bastard. Chaos City is already in cahoots with Alex. Now, even the forest trolls have succumbed to Alex's threat. Is the unification of the Roth Empire going to be ruined by him alone? Sean, who had returned to his room, smashed the vase on the table in anger. "Your Highness, how about we escort you back to Rhoda first? Chaos City is filled with demons and demons. You're still injured, so it would be good for you to go back and recuperate for a while," a 10th-tier knight said to Sean with a concerned look in his eyes. "Yes, Your Highness. I think Michael is going to do you harm. If we don't leave now, we might cause trouble," another knight chimed in. "If we leave now, wouldn't we become deserters?" Sean shook his head. Even though Alex had broken his arm yesterday, he had never thought of leaving Chaos City in advance. It didn't matter if he lost his arm, but if he lost his place in Andre's heart, then he would really be gone in this life. Sean looked at these two trusted generals, and lowered his voice slightly. "However, Michael probably already knows that a few ordinary elves and humans have died. Given his usual style, I'm afraid he won't let me leave so easily. In order to avoid being too passive when the time comes, you two should arrange a few passageways out of Chaos City in case we need them." "Yes." The two knights' expressions darkened, and they quickly nodded. Sean had already calmed down. He sat down at the table again, and fell silent for a while with his brows furrowed. He said, "Royal Father will set off for Chaos City tomorrow. When Josh stays in Rodu, I'm worried that he will cause trouble." "You're saying Josh will take the opportunity to rebel?" a knight asked in shock. Although Josh has the Magus Tower behind him, he doesn't have a strong military background. It's not easy for him to control Rodu, let alone the entire Roth Empire. "He shouldn't make such a stupid decision," another knight said. "Don't underestimate his management over the years, and don't overestimate his patience. After Bruno's death, he wouldn't be him if he didn't take the initiative to do something when Alex threatened him with death." Sean shook his head with a cold smile. "No matter if my guess is right or wrong, we have to make some preparations in advance. Pass down my orders. Let the Northwestern Alliance Army get someone to keep an eye on Sean. From today onwards, forbid him from leaving Chaos City," Michael said to Dicus. "All right." Dicus nodded, and continued, "Tomorrow, the representatives from the various races will set off for the peace talks. Andre from the Roth Empire will be there personally. How do you intend to deal with this matter then?" Sean gave the order to kill the innocent residents of Chaos City. "Sean has to give us an explanation for this. Even if he's the first prince of the Roth Empire, we still have to treat him with respect." Michael said with a resolute expression, "His father will be here tomorrow. Then I'll make things clear to him." "All right." Dicus nodded. "Hurry up with the arrangements for the Peace Alliance's signing. We have to form a firm peace alliance tonight so that we can have a strong bargaining chip during the peace talks," Michael instructed Dicus. "Miss Connie is already on her way. The Goblin Chief and Dwarf King will also arrive in Chaos City tonight. Lord Lewis, Lord Douglas, and a few of the Dragon Chiefs have already arrived in Chaos City. Only Lord Alex and the mysterious Lantist have not confirmed the time yet," Dicus quickly replied. "If you want to find Alex, go to the textile factory in the north of the city to look for Irina. Only she knows where Alex is now, and only Alex can contact him in Lantist." Michael stood up. "I'm going out for a while." "All right. I'll get someone to prepare a carriage for you. Go out from the back door. Just prepare a normal horse-drawn carriage." Soon, a normal-looking black horse-drawn carriage drove out from the city lord's castle's back door, and went straight to Aiden Square. The horse-drawn carriage stopped outside the magic potion shop. Michael alighted, and entered the potion shop. About half an hour later, Michael left the magic potion shop, and the horse-drawn carriage drove to Chaos School. "I didn't expect you to kill Bruno." When Meg returned to the restaurant, Irina was already sitting there. She looked at him with a smile as soon as he entered. "This doesn't seem like something you would do with your cautious personality." Actually, this is a cautious choice. A powerful tribe with a dangerous stance is more troublesome than a powerful tribe that is wavering because of fear. Killing Bruno would not only kill the forest troll's desire to follow the Roth Empire, but it would also strengthen the determination of the other tribes to form an alliance. It's a very valuable investment, Meg said with a smile as he poured himself a glass of water. The effect is achieved. Irina looked at Meg with admiration and said, Michael will be holding a peace alliance signing ceremony at the City Lord's castle tonight. He asked me to inform you and Lantish to attend. Dexter is already in Chaos City. He can just be there tonight. Meg nodded. I'm a little worried about that lass, Connie. Although Oster has lost an arm, he definitely won't be lying on the ground. Why don't you go and fetch her? Irina said to Meg. All right. They should have set off by now. I'll go. Meg nodded. He finished the water in his glass in one gulp, and went out again. Just like what Irina said, Oster was a determined war maniac. He had planned the Falk tribe's internal strife with the intention of controlling the Falk tribe directly, and then the entire orc race. However, Connie ruined his plan. Now that Connie was going to represent the Falk tribe to join the peace alliance with the other orc tribes that were on the side of peace, Oster would definitely not let it go so easily. Rex was only one person, after all, and the Falk tribe still couldn't trust him internally. Therefore, it was only right that Meg welcome Connie. Are you sure they will pass by here this time? Oster, who had lost an arm, asked in the Falk tribe's direction as he stood on top of a mountain. An orc at the side patted his chest, and guaranteed, don't worry, Chief. It's one of us who is driving the flying steed this time. If he can't bring her here, I will kill his entire family. We just have to wait here. I guarantee it. That better be the case. Otherwise, I will kill your entire family. Oster gave him a sideways glance. That orc's expression froze instantly. He smiled awkwardly as he looked in the Falk tribe's direction and prayed in his heart. He only hoped that that fellow would be reliable enough to bring that little bitch Connie here. This time, Oster had brought 5 10th-tier orc powerhouses to surround Connie personally. He was determined to kill her. They would hand over the control of the orcs officially on the eve of the peace conference. Get up. I'll ride the big white bird. I've flown over Chaos City before, so I'm very experienced. I know the way. On the other side, Connie kicked the orc away, and took over the reins confidently. Chapter 1938. Rex sat at the back, and looked at that orc whose expression had changed a few times as he tried to regain control of the pilot's seat. He didn't stop Connie. It was no secret that there was a traitor in the Falk tribe. Apart from himself and Rex, he wasn't even sure who was Oster's man. Connie's itinerary was exposed in advance when she went to Rodu by herself previously. It was just that her route was too strange, and she managed to avoid all of the other party's attacks. She arrived at Chaos City safely, and the other party missed. And this time, the orcs were divided into 2 factions when they went to Chaos City for the peace conference. Oster wanted to have the final say in the orcs, and killing them halfway was the last chance. He had made some arrangements, but because there was no one in the Falk tribe that he could trust, he was still the only one accompanying Connie on the trip to Chaos City. As for this orc who was flying the steed, he was also randomly selected. Anyway, no matter how meticulous the selection was, he couldn't guarantee the other party's loyalty. He might as well just choose one randomly and deny him directly. Judging from his unusual anxiousness, he must have been bribed by Oster, or perhaps threatened by him. Chief, why don't I drive? You can just have a good rest at the back, the orc said carefully with an anxious look on his face. You think you're more capable than me? Connie glanced at him from the side. No, no. I'm just worried that it will be too tiring for you, Chief. The orc quickly shook his head. It's all right. I think it's fun. You can have a rest at the back. Connie pulled the rope around the big white bird's neck and flew towards the south. When the orc saw that, he quickly said, Hey, hey, hey. You're flying in the wrong direction. Chaos City should be flying towards the front. Do you see that tall mountain in the distance? You should be flying in that direction. Connie blushed slightly, and seriously said, Who said so? Flying like this is the right way. I have a very good sense of direction. I've flown over Chaos City hundreds of times, and I've always flown in this direction. After passing through that mountain, there will be plains all the way, and we'll be close to Chaos City. The orc was so anxious that his forehead was covered in cold sweat. Listen to me. You can't go wrong. I'm not listening, I'm not listening. Connie shook his head repeatedly, his gaze resolute. The direction I choose is definitely right. There is absolutely no mistake. But the beast tamer still wanted to say something. What's on that mountain? Lex suddenly asked. The muffled sound made the beast tamer's heart jolt, and a chill ran down his spine. His body stiffened slightly as he turned around with a smile, and said, There's snow. When he met Lex's gaze, he felt as though all his secrets had been seen through. I'm afraid of the cold. I'm not going. Connie refused even more decisively this time. She patted the big white bird's back, and rode the big white bird towards the south like riding a horse. Soon, the tall mountain became an invisible black dot. It's over, the beast tamer's heart turned cold, and he sat down on the bird's back. Are you going to jump down yourself, or do you want me to kick you down? Lex asked the beast tamer coldly. I just want my family to live. Why won't you give me a chance? The beast tamer shouted hysterically at Lex and Connie. Connie looked at the beast tamer in confusion. I'm going to kill you. That beast tamer wanted to kill him. A short knife suddenly appeared from his wide sleeves, and stabbed towards Connie's back. However, just as the tip of his knife appeared, Lex had already kicked him in the back. That beast tamer could only let out a scream before he was sent flying. After a long while, a muffled sound of something falling to the ground could be heard. Was he bribed by Oster too? Connie finally came back to his senses, and blinked as he asked Lex. What do you think? Lex rolled her eyes. She didn't know how to praise her precious disciple anymore. That seems to be the case. Connie nodded seriously. When we come back from this meeting, it seems like I'll have to teach you more about how to read people, Lex said with a sigh. She felt that there was still a long way to go. Master, actually, even if you didn't do anything, he wouldn't have been able to stab me, Connie said seriously. I'm confident. I'm really not confident about that. Lex shook her head. Then which direction should we fly in now? Connie looked around, and asked. Didn't you say that you have a strong sense of direction? I lose my sense of direction when I get nervous. Connie blushed. He looked around, and randomly pointed in a direction. Let's go. It's here, why aren't they here yet? Oster asked with a frown half an hour later as he looked at the sky where only a bird was flying slowly. They should be here soon. The orc who had made a solemn vow earlier wiped the cold sweat off his forehead as he panicked. All the orcs had different expressions as they looked at the empty sky. No matter how slow Connie and the rest were flying, they should be here by now. Everyone couldn't help but recall the previous ambush. They had also waited here for a long time, but Connie had already arrived at Chaos City, and they didn't even see a bird feather. The person you're looking for better not be a problem. Oster looked at him with a deep gaze. His whole family is in my hands. There definitely won't be a problem. The orc wiped the cold sweat off his forehead, and nodded. They waited for another half an hour. They didn't see Connie, but a purple-striped griffin came from behind them. Alex! Everyone looked at the majestic purple-striped griffin and the person on its back, and they couldn't help but exclaim. Meg frowned as he looked at the mountain peak below. Oster was the leader of the orcs, and there were 6 10th-tier powerhouses, and dozens of 8th-tier and 9th-tier orcs. They had obviously emptied the resources of the warring orcs to form such an ambush. However, judging from their condition, they shouldn't have encountered Connie and the rest yet. While he heaved a sigh of relief, he was also a little puzzled. This place wasn't far from the Fog tribe, and it was the only way to get to Chaos City. Could it be that Connie and the rest hadn't set off yet? He didn't see Connie on his way here either. Alex, what are you doing here among the orcs? Oster shouted as he looked at Meg warily. A few 10th-tier orcs were also approaching him. The news of Alex killing Bruno had already spread to the orcs. He was also one of the masterminds behind the assassination of Alex back then. Now that Alex had suddenly appeared here, could it be that he was here to find trouble with him? After losing an arm, Oster's power dropped drastically. He couldn't summon up any fighting spirit in front of Alex after witnessing the battle between Alex and that devil. Are you afraid if I say I'm going to kill you? Meg asked Oster with a half-smile. End of chapter. Chapter 1939. Was he scared? Oster was really scared. Alex chopped off one of Sean's hands, and even killed Bruno. Now that he was the one who wanted to kill him, there was no room for doubt. Alex, you and I have no feud, and we even fought against the devil together. Why do you want to kill me? Even if your power has increased tremendously, what's the difference between you and the devil? Oster said in a low voice as he took half a step back to let the others stand in front of him. Meg looked at Oster, whose eyes were gleaming, with a smile. He actually didn't want to kill Oster when he went out today. It was just a coincidence that he met him. All these years, Oster dared to challenge the Roth Empire crazily. Other than his lack of brains, he could be considered a formidable person. Alex and Oster were archenemies when he was the commander of the Northwestern Allied Army. Ever since he started to become famous, the orcs had never had an advantage in the Northwestern battlefront. Oster hated him to the core. This was most likely the reason why he would put aside his old grudges and join forces with Josh to set up the ambush on that rainy night back then. Today's ambush was obviously targeted at Connie. They didn't see Connie, but he did. They didn't know if they were lucky or unlucky. The atmosphere was a little tense. All the orcs looked at Meg nervously. Although they had 6 10th-tier orcs and 10s of 8th-tier and 9th-tier powerhouses, Meg was alone. But even so, it still made them feel pressured. One had to know that just yesterday, Meg broke through the combined attack of 6 10th-tier powerhouses and chopped off one of Sean's arms. The so-called advantage in numbers was just a joke in the face of absolute power. I'll spare your life today and give you a chance to participate in the peace conference, Meg said coldly to Oster as he looked at him. Oster's throat moved, and he swallowed the harsh words that were about to come out of his mouth. Although Alex's words and tone made him feel like he was being spared, he also felt a tinge of relief in his anger. This is the orcs' territory after all, Oster said with a strong front. Wherever my sword reaches, that is my territory, Meg said calmly. Retreat. Oster turned around and mounted a flying mount at the side, leading the orcs away in a hurry. In terms of acting tough, he had to admit that he had lost. Meg watched the orcs disappear into the sky before he steered Oz toward the Fog tribe. It was not that he could not kill Oster. Oster, who had lost an arm, was much weaker than Bruno. He was not a match for his sword. As for the 5 orcs, although they were also 10th tier, they couldn't compare to Sean's 6 10th tier powerhouses who had undergone joint attack training. As long as he was fast enough, they wouldn't pose much of an obstacle to him. He had other plans for Oster's pig brain. Although they were both war fanatics, the orcs led by Oster had an irreconcilable conflict with the Roth Empire. Once the war resumed, there would definitely be a battle between the two. In terms of the fact that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, Oster was more valuable alive than dead. As long as Oster was still alive, the orc tribes along the northwestern border of the Roth Empire would resist the Roth Empire resolutely, and stop their expansion. If Oster died, it would be very difficult for another leader like him to appear among the orcs in a short period of time. Connie wouldn't be able to do it either. The orc tribes that were in a state of disunity would be in a very bad situation. Meg circled above the Falk tribe. After making sure he didn't sense Rex's aura, he mumbled with a strange expression, could it be Connie who is driving the flying mount this time? Oster and the rest had already left, and the danger of the ambush had been resolved. Meg went straight back to Chaos City. Boss, what a coincidence. We just arrived at Chaos City, and happened to come to the restaurant for a meal. When Meg reached the restaurant's entrance, Connie came out from the side, and looked at Meg excitedly. Where did you guys come from? Meg looked at Connie and Rex behind him with a strange expression. He didn't see them on his way back just now. We came from the tribe, of course. Furthermore, I was the one who steered the big white bird to Chaos City today. It landed accurately. Isn't it very impressive? Connie said proudly. That is indeed very impressive. Meg nodded. If they had a sense of direction, they wouldn't have lost their way at their doorstep. Thinking of that, Oster and the rest really had it tough. They met such a weirdo, and even the ambush became a random event. If that bird didn't know the way, we would be enjoying the sea breeze on the Demon Islands now, Rex said calmly. Connie blushed and guiltily said, Master, I was the one who gave it directions. Come in. I went out for a while, and haven't eaten yet. Meg opened the door with a smile, and brought the two of them into the restaurant. Boss, where did you go? Why did you take leave again? Connie asked curiously as she followed him in. I went out to collect ingredients, and was thinking about what new product to release. Meg thought that she had also avoided him perfectly. To an assassin, he didn't know if this was considered a superpower. He closed the door and looked at the two of them. What do you want to eat? We still have to go to the city lord's castle for a meeting later. Something simple will do. Connie smiled innocently. Why don't we have 100 mutton skewers and 10 skewers of roasted pig's eyes first? But it jumps over the wall, is it not easy to make now? Rex asked after some thought. Meg glanced at Rex's thick hair. Could it be that she wanted another course of treatment to strengthen her foundation? Speaking of which, this master-disciple pair was really a perfect match. Skewers are not a problem, but the Buddha jumps over the wall really can't be made now. Why don't you come back tomorrow or the day after the meeting? Meg said with a smile. All right. Rex nodded. I'll come back tomorrow. Meg went upstairs to change his clothes and went down to the kitchen to cook. Speaking of which, he had only come back for a glass of water since he left in the morning. He didn't even have time to eat lunch. Connie stood at the kitchen door and looked at Meg, who was grilling skewers. She swallowed her saliva and asked, Boss, do you know that the peace conference is going to be held tomorrow? Yes, I heard about it. Meg nodded. I'm an important member of the conference. Connie patted her chest and said. Meg glanced at her. This little bee-steered girl who was timid and ignorant when he first met her had already developed the aura of a queen who could take charge of her own affairs. Of course, this could only be vaguely felt when she was quiet. Moreover, she had already started to participate in matters that could affect the situation of the entire continent. This change was something that he didn't expect at all. He just picked up a bee-steered girl on the way home. Then you have to do a good job. Meg smiled and passed a handful of freshly grilled mutton skewers to her. Yes, of course I will. Connie took the mutton skewers and bit off a piece of mutton. A sweet and satisfied smile immediately appeared on her face. Chapter 1940. After lunch, Connie and Rex went to the city lord's castle. Meanwhile, Meg went to Hannah's brewery since he had nothing to do in the afternoon. He assisted her in testing the brewing machine, and even specially transferred a few people from the textile factory to operate the steam engine. The coal was shoveled into the boiler, and the steam started to move the pistons, which then moved the gears to transmit the motion. All the machines in the brewery came to life instantly. Moreover, the sound was smooth and pleasant. It's really moving. Mobai was a little agitated as he looked at the liquid and mist flowing slowly in the pipes, and those moving machines with disbelief. Although these parts were all made by him and Lulu, he still couldn't hide his excitement when he saw them pieced together into a huge machine and running smoothly. Lulu also had an honest smile on her face. They had put in a lot of time and effort to make this machine, so they were naturally happy to see it running successfully. It's really working. It's really working. There's no problem at all. The happiest person was none other than Hannah. She ran back and forth in the brewery several times to make sure that every part of the machine was running successfully, and that there were no mistakes. Her face was flushed with excitement. "Boss, you're really awesome." Hannah gave Meg a big hug before hugging Mobai and Lulu. Then, she clenched her fists and confidently said, "Next, let me dominate Chaos City's liquor market. I want to be the real queen of rum. What's with all this Chinibu air about?" Meg looked at Hannah with a smile. She finally had a brewery that belonged to her in Chaos City again, and the scale and degree of automation were much higher than the small workshop she had previously. He could imagine that the residents of Chaos City would be able to enjoy a discounted price, high quality, and sufficient supply of rum very soon. Meanwhile, the brewing industry in Chaos City would also be facing a downsizing and reshuffling. The machine is running normally. This is developed based on your previous machine. The instructions are here. You can study and learn by yourself. Meg passed a thin manual to Hannah. From today onwards, he would be a qualified investor, and would no longer be involved in the brewery's work. All right. Hannah solemnly took the brochure and looked at Meg with a serious face. "Don't worry, boss. I will soon let Mamie's customers drink the new rum that I brewed. I'll wait for your good news." Meg nodded with a smile and said his goodbyes. Calculating the time, he should be preparing to go to the city lord's mansion to participate in the Peace Alliance's establishment meeting. When Meg returned to the restaurant, Irina was already waiting for him there. "I went to Hannah's brewery and helped her test the machine. Connie and the others have already arrived," Meg said, looking at her. "The meeting has already begun. We should leave now." Irina glanced at the clock on the wall. "Wait a moment." Meg went upstairs and quickly changed his clothes. Tonight was a meeting, so Meg did not change into his cool and valiant cloak. Instead, he changed into a slightly simpler, loose robe that did not easily reveal his figure. He tied it around his waist and put on his black and white mask. "Let's go." Irina held on to Meg's arm. A faint golden light flashed under their feet, and the two of them disappeared from the restaurant. In the meeting hall of the city lord's mansion, Michael and Roland sat in the main seats. The Goblin Chief, Davis, the Dwarf King, Job, the Golden Dragon Chief, Lewis, the Frost Dragon Chief, Douglas, and the Chief of the Fog Tribe, Connie, were already seated. Everyone sat quietly and glanced at the door from time to time. Alex and Irina, as well as that mysterious Lantis representative, were still not present. "Michael, are you sure you have informed them?" Lewis asked Michael a little impatiently. "They should be here soon." Michael nodded. Alex was the one who suggested to form the alliance in advance. It did not make sense for them not to be present. Could it be that they were injured in the battle that killed Bruno in the morning? Douglas suddenly looked out of the door, and softly said, "They're here." Everyone looked toward the door. Irina and Alex walked in side by side, one in black and one in white. Their steps were the same, and that powerful aura made people want to avoid them subconsciously. And behind the two of them was a magic caster who was holding a crystal ball in his hand. It was the High Priest of Lantis, Dexter. "We were delayed on the way," Meg calmly explained, and then sat down in the empty seat beside Connie. Irina sat down beside Meg. Dexter sat down in the furthest corner, and nodded slightly at everyone without saying anything. "How did you kill Bruno?" Lewis asked Meg curiously. Bruno's power was in the top 10 of the entire Norland continent. Even Lewis was not confident of defeating him. 2 strikes. Meg was a man of few words, and maintained his cold and aloof persona. The leaders of the various races were surprised to hear this. Even with Bruno's strength, Alex had only used 2 strikes to kill him. Sure enough, a 10th-tier powerhouse had no chance of winning in front of him. Connie looked at Meg with admiration. She did not forget to turn to greet Irina. "Hello, big sister Irina." "Hello, Connie." Irina's lips curled into a smile. Connie wanted to say, "Your husband is the best." However, she felt that this occasion was not suitable, so she could only keep it in her heart. However, this Master Alex was really impressive. He had disappeared for 3 years, and now he had returned. He was like a king who could kill anyone in his way. "All right. Since everyone is here, let's get straight to the point. Let's talk about the Peace Alliance." Michael looked at everyone and loudly said, "Now that the devils have appeared, we need the cooperation of all races. We need to renew the peace treaty and let the peace continue for another 100 years. Let all races cooperate with each other. That is the only way to deal with the devils. Now, the Roth Empire is trying to overturn the peace treaty and restart the racial war. Once the racial war starts again, the devils may become very powerful. By then, even if all races work together, it will be difficult to subdue them. In order to avoid the tragedy of racial war, all races have reached a broad consensus. Today, we hope to reach a stable and binding alliance, the Peace Alliance. The purpose of the Peace Alliance is to maintain the peace of the Norland continent. We will resolutely resist and defeat all forces and actions that destroy the peace. We will work together to capture the devils and kill them or reseal them. Chapter 1941. This negotiation went very smoothly. Those who could sit here tonight were the races that had already confirmed their stand. The goblins and dwarves were the ones with vested interests. The goblins relied on the minerals that were produced endlessly in the underground cavern to make a fortune. They traded with the Norland continent, and accumulated a lot of wealth in a short 100 years. The dwarves had become respected craftsmen instead of tool men who relied on the strong races. They had also made great progress by relying on their forging and construction skills. Connie should be considered a lover of peace. The little girl actually didn't have many thoughts. She just inherited her father's philosophy of keeping the orcs away from war. The consideration of the two giants of the giant dragons was more based on the existence of the Great Old One. This was also the only existence that could threaten the giant dragons. After the battle at the Thunderstorm Mountains, the giant dragons had reached a consensus that the devils were extremely dangerous. That was why Lewis and Douglas were allowed to represent them in this peace alliance. As for Chaos City, it was born for peace, so it had a natural mission. Dexter didn't say a word from the beginning to the end. He only made it clear that he would follow Alex's choice when he expressed his stance. This gave Mag a very powerful trump card. Dexter's attitude basically showed Lantist's loyalty to him. Together with Irina, it meant that he already had a force that all the other races had to face seriously. Of course, the fact that this negotiation went so smoothly had something to do with Mag killing Bruno this morning. After the Roth Empire lost the Forest Trolls as a strong ally, it was hard for them to do anything alone. The possibility of them creating a bloodbath on the Norland continent with the power of a nation was greatly reduced. If all the races successfully formed an alliance, they would be able to go against the Roth Empire. This is the specific treaty of the alliance. It states the travel obligations of the members of the Peace Alliance and the benefits they will enjoy in the alliance. Everyone, please take a look. If you have any questions, feel free to raise them, and we will discuss and amend them on the spot. Michael got Dykes to distribute the Treaty of the Alliance to every representative. Everyone looked at the treaty carefully. It was basically what they had discussed previously. It stated the responsibilities of the members of the Alliance very simply. They had to be responsible for peace, maintain the peace of the Norland continent, and eliminate all factors that would affect peace. I represent the 108 orc tribes to agree to this treaty. Connie looked through the treaty carefully, and after confirming with Lex, he was the first to speak. We, the Goblin tribe, have no objections. We can sign it directly. The Great Elder of the Goblin tribe put down the treaty and nodded. We, the Dwarf race, also agree, the Dwarf King said in a loud voice. Lewis and Douglas had a short conversation, and quickly reached a consensus. They also expressed their willingness to accept the contract. The contract is pretty good. I have no objections. Meg nodded slightly. He was the one who had drafted the contract. The Night Elves are fine too, Irina said calmly. Same for me, Dexter said in the common language that was not very standard. Since everyone has reached a consensus, let's sign the contract and officially establish the Peace Alliance, Michael said loudly with joy on his face. The simplified version of the treaty was taken back, and a contract with a gilded hardcover was presented to the representatives. The contract used the highest grade of contract paper. It was usually used to sign treaties between different races, and had a strong binding effect on the signatories. Connie picked up the pen, and signed her name on it almost without any hesitation. She also pricked her finger, and pressed a fingerprint on her name. A faint red light flew out from that name, and disappeared in between her brows. Meg also signed the name Alex without hesitation, and pressed his fingerprint on it. Somehow, he felt that he seemed to have established some kind of connection with this treaty. This contract paper was indeed a little mysterious. Everyone also went forward to sign their names. Michael raised the treaty that was filled with everyone's signatures, and smilingly said, "The treaty has been signed. The Peace Alliance is officially established today. I hope we can put aside our prejudices and old grudges, and work hard together to maintain the peace of the Norland continent." Ding! The host has made an outstanding contribution to maintaining world peace. In order to reward the host with the high-level peace-loving quality, the host can request a wish recipe from the system, and the system will fulfill any request of the host. Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly appeared in Meg's mind. I can get a reward for maintaining world peace. Meg was slightly taken aback. A harmonious and loving world can allow people to enjoy life, and is also more conducive to promoting good food. As a candidate for the god of cookery, you should take maintaining world peace as your responsibility, and create conditions for people to enjoy good food. The system said seriously. You're really a positive energy system. Meg nodded with a very pleased expression. He didn't care what the system said, as long as he received a reward. He had just been considering what new product he should offer after his leave, and the system had given him a pillow. He smiled internally as he said, "Any request." "As long as it's related to food, any request is possible," the system confirmed. "Then, as someone who has maintained world peace, it's not too much for me to ask for a Manchu Han Imperial feast, right?" Meg said seriously. "Please choose a recipe. Don't make such an outrageous request." "I want a Manchu Han Imperial feast." The Manchu Han Imperial feast is a royal feast that gathers the essence of all the major cuisines. If the host really learns how to cook a Manchu Han Imperial feast, he would have mastered the essence of Chinese cuisine. The host still has a long way to go, so please don't bite off more than you can chew, the system said seriously. "Alright, then I want a roast goose." Meg could tell that the system wasn't so easily fooled, so he changed the subject. Amy had been talking about roast goose for a long time. Although roast duck had become the best substitute, roast goose was still roast goose, and was different from roast duck. Ding! The classic Cantonese roast goose recipe and experience bag have been issued. Please learn it in time. The system was rather straightforward this time. Meg accepted it happily. Anyway, it was an unexpected gain. After everyone signed the treaty, they briefly discussed about the peace conference tomorrow. The giant dragons were the finale, and the seven forces had formed an alliance. No matter how arrogant the Roth Empire was, they wouldn't have the guts to provoke the peace alliance again. In the city lord's manor's garden. "Your Highness, Michael has gathered the dwarves, goblins, and others in advance. I'm afraid it's disadvantageous to the Roth Empire," a 10th-tier powerhouse said to Sean. The other powerhouses in the room didn't look too good either. "This bunch of cowards only dare to gather together and make use of each other. I'd like to see what they can come up with before the peace conference," Sean said with a cold smile. Chapter 1942. The Wind Forest, Starry Cavern Abode. Helena stood on a platform, and below her stood Sally and the remaining 6 10th-tier powerhouses of the elven race. "I'm going to attend this peace conference in person to fight for more benefits for the elven race." Helena looked at everyone, and said in a dignified voice, "In the past 3 years, the power of the elven race has been declining. I heard that many of our young elves have been bewitched. After I leave, you have to keep an eye on things. Don't let others take advantage of this and cause more trouble." "Yes." Everyone replied in unison, not daring to look at Helena. "During this time, Sally will be managing the forest in my place. If you have any problems, report them to her, and she'll make the decision," Helena continued as she looked down at Sally. Sally also looked at her and nodded slightly. All of the elven powerhouses had different expressions upon hearing this, but they still nodded in agreement. During this period of time, Helena had entrusted Sally with an important task and nurtured her in all aspects. She had already regarded her as her successor. Sally had indeed lived up to her expectations. She had become more and more mature in handling matters, and her power had already broken through to the 8th tier. She had become the most outstanding elven powerhouse of the younger generation after Irina. "You can all go now." "Sally, stay," Helena said in an indifferent voice. All of the elves quickly left, and only Sally and Helena were left in the massive starry cavern abode. Helena took a step forward, and landed lightly in front of Sally. With her back facing her, she said in an indifferent voice, "Do you know why I'm handing the elven race to you?" "You don't have many choices in the current elven race," Sally said in an equally indifferent voice as she looked at Helena's back. "You're becoming more and more like her." Helena turned around and looked into Sally's eyes as if she was trying to see through her heart. "Isn't this what you want?" Sally didn't avoid her gaze, and continued to speak in an indifferent voice. Helena smiled with a hint of self-mockery in her voice. "Yes, I have to admit that Irina is the most outstanding prodigy of the elven race in the past 1,000 years. Then why did you kill her? It's not always a good thing to have a prodigy. She tried to overthrow the elven race that we built with our blood, but she still refused to come to her senses. I had no choice but to kill her in order to protect the elven race." Helena's expression was a little regretful. Maybe the people who left the Wind Forest got the life they really wanted. Sally bit her lips and tried to make her tone and choice of words as calm as possible. That's impossible." There was a hint of disdain and decisiveness in Helena's voice as she said, "This is a cruel world, and their so-called freedom won't be able to provide them with any protection. The elves who are stranded outside will be bullied and toyed with by other races. That's definitely not the life that elves want. But in the Wind Forest, they were bullied and played by their clansmen. Is this the life they want?" Sally asked. "If you want to receive protection, you have to pay a price, and those heroes who have paid should also receive more rewards." Helena's gaze sharpened instantly. She looked at Sally with narrowed eyes, and said, "Are you doubting me?" "No, I just want to know. When you and Her Majesty led the elves to fight against the invading demons and orcs, did you think about how to distribute the elves who fought with you after you won the battle?" "You were their most trusted high priestess," Sally said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. "If you continue to have such thoughts, then you're really a terrible princess," Helena said with a frown. Sally looked at her and pursed her lips without saying anything. Helena turned around and solemnly said, "Go back and think about what the elven race would be like without the queen and me." Sally was silent for a while before she turned and left. After a long time, a sigh came from the starry cave. Rodu. The palace's meeting hall was still brightly lit. Chaos City has already formed an alliance with the dwarves, goblins, giant dragons, orcs and other races. Alex, Irina, and that mysterious Lantist are also involved. "I'm afraid we won't be able to squeeze anything out of them when we go to Chaos City this time," André said to his confidants with a dark expression. All the officials also looked very solemn. Originally, with the Roth Empire's current power, together with the forest trolls, they would be invincible on the Norland continent, one in the north and one in the south. But now that Bruno was dead, the forest trolls' line was completely broken. And the news that came back today was that the king of the dwarves, the chief of the goblins, and the rest had arrived at Chaos City in advance, and were having a secret meeting. Although the Roth Empire was powerful, it wasn't powerful enough to dominate the Norland continent. The alliance of a few weak races was already a headache. With the addition of the giant dragons, Alex and Irina, the duo, it was even more unbearable. At this moment, they couldn't help but think that if Alex didn't betray the Roth Empire, and instead became the Roth Empire's military commander, the ones who would be trembling now would be the other races. "Your Majesty, Alex is a human, after all, and has been the commander of our Northwestern Allied Army for many years. Can we persuade him to submit to our Roth Empire again with reason and emotion?" An official said. "Fool! Count, have you forgotten that Alex has consecutively hurt the second prince and the first prince? How can such a strange person submit to the Empire again? Even if he really agrees to return, we have to be careful of his true intentions." It's tantamount to inviting a wolf into the house, a general said loudly. The ministers began to argue with each other about whether or not to enlist Alex. Josh sat at the side quietly. All right. Andre interrupted their argument with a frown. They were arguing about useless things. He turned to look at Josh. Josh, what do you think? Josh stood up and respectfully said, Your Majesty, I think that since the various races have decided to join forces against the Empire, the peace conference is no longer meaningful. Why don't we strike first and gain the upper hand by attacking them? With the absolute advantage of our powerhouses and cavalry, we can occupy some of their territories quickly. All the officials looked at Josh in shock. The second prince was gentle and liked magic. They didn't expect him to come up with such a radical plan. Andre's brows relaxed a little when he heard that. He nodded with a smile and said, This is an interesting suggestion. Your Majesty, this matter must be taken seriously. An official stood up and worriedly said, The peace conference hasn't started, and the peace treaty hasn't expired yet. If we force our troops, we might be criticized by the other races. Chapter 1943. It was a dark and windy night. Tens of thousands of cavalrymen were gathering at the northwestern border of the Roth Empire. Recently, the Orc tribe's invasion had been decreasing, but the number of cavalrymen deployed from various places had been increasing silently. Those who had been at the border for some time knew that the northwestern border was going to change. Over the years, the various military regions had been rotating in the northwestern military region. They had relied on the constant battles with the Orcs to train their combat power, and had always maintained a balance of numbers. However, recently, the elites from various armies had been sent to the northwestern military region continuously, but the original garrison troops had not left. This made people start to have other thoughts. These years, the Orcs had been harassing the Roth Empire's borders, and many villages had been raided. Furthermore, after many years of fighting, both sides had suffered injuries and deaths. The hatred had accumulated, and all the soldiers had a fire in their hearts. If they had the chance, they wouldn't mind charging into the Orcs with their swords and horses. Now, they only lacked an order from Rodu, and they could cross the mountains in front of them, charge into the Twilight Forest, and make that fertile land and vast forest part of the Roth Empire's territory. At the southern border of the Roth Empire, the number of border troops had also been increasing gradually recently. Although the official order had not been issued, many military generals already knew that the Roth Empire might go to war on all fronts, and they had planted the Roth Empire's flag further away. The hearts of the Empire's soldiers were slowly swelling like their power had been increasing over the years. That big city in the south that could be compared to Rodu was still not worth mentioning in their eyes. Vic Mountain. The elves had already entered a state of war. Evacuate all important facilities and personnel into the underground cavern. Pay close attention to the Roth Empire's movements. Once a large-scale army appears, don't fight them head-on. Retreat as you fight in the underground cavern to stop them from advancing quickly. At the same time, preserve your strength and reduce the casualties to the greatest extent. A goblin elder ordered. The suspension bridge of Isin Castle rose slowly, and completely isolated the entire castle from the outside world. The foreign tribes in the city had all been chased out of the castle a few days ago. All the exits had been sealed, and soldiers were stationed to guard them. Overnight, the situation on the Norland continent became very tense. All the races started to prepare for war. Before the results of the peace conference were announced, these measures would probably not be changed. After returning to the restaurant, Irina took a sip of red wine and said to Meg, who was sitting opposite her, "It went smoother than I thought. Peace is in the interest of most races." "This result is actually within my expectations," Meg said with a smile. Do you think Andre will come tomorrow? Or will he start the war in advance? Irina asked. If Andre starts the war in advance, the Roth Empire would be able to conquer the Twilight Forest in the west or the Wind Forest in the east in a very short time given their current power. Meg said with a serious expression. Furthermore, once the occupation becomes an established fact, and the Roth Empire no longer attacks the other races, then the race whose territory has been invaded will have a hard time asking the other races to reclaim their territory. The Beastmen have already joined the Peace Alliance. Irina frowned. Meg shook his head. Benefits come first between races. We will uphold justice for Connie, but even the giant dragons will not go against the Roth Empire directly for the Beastmen. The purpose of this alliance is actually more of a deterrent effect. However, if the Beastmen are really invaded, as long as he can withstand the first wave of attacks and create some time for the Alliance to send reinforcements, I believe the other races will still be willing to send an army to assist their allies. This is more in line with the interests of the other races. Irina nodded thoughtfully. Even people of the same race might not be able to do their best. It was indeed unrealistic to expect the other races to protect you. In that case, do we need to send reinforcements to the Beastmen in advance? Irina asked again. Based on my understanding of Andre, he will not do such a thing without a valid reason. Meg shook his head with a smile, and said, once he tears up the peace treaty and attacks the Beastmen or elves, it will be equivalent to standing directly against the Peace Alliance, or even the other races. Then, the other races will have a reason to join forces to deal with him. Even if he can obtain the Twilight Forest and the Wind Forest in a short time, this will bring about a joint blockade from the other races, as well as a possible encirclement and annihilation. Do you think he will give up his ambition to invade other races because of the establishment of the Peace Alliance? He is obviously not such a person, so I am very curious how he will respond to this to fulfill his ambition. Meg shook his head slightly. Seems like the peace conference tomorrow will be very interesting. Irina's lips curled up into a smile. Father, you are finally back. Amy ran downstairs, and looked at the two of them drinking red wine. She put her hands on her waist, and angrily said, have you forgotten about us? And came downstairs quietly with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and looked at Meg and Irina with a smile. I forgot that our two little cuties haven't eaten yet. What do you want to eat? I will make it for you right away. Meg looked at the two little ones, and slapped his head as he stood up. Too many things had happened today, and he had forgotten about Amy and Anne. Speaking of which, we haven't had dinner either. Irina also looked at him. That's just right. Let's have a good meal. Meg pinched Amy's cheek with a smile, and said, Father will cook roast goose for you tomorrow. Roast goose? Really? Amy's eyes immediately lit up, and she swallowed her saliva. Then, she looked back at Ugly Duckling, and her smile became even more vibrant. It has wings. Meow. Ugly Duckling meowed. I am not a real cat, but you are a real dog. Where is Anne? What do you want to eat? Meg asked again. And stroked Ugly Duckling's head. You want to eat roast goose too? Meg glanced at Ugly Duckling. Meow. Ugly Duckling's orange fur stood up. Meg went into the kitchen, and soon made a sumptuous dinner. When the last dish, spicy crayfish, was served, everyone started to eat. Father, will the restaurant be open tomorrow? Amy asked as she nibbled on the crayfish that Meg had peeled for her. I might have to take another day off to study roast goose. Meg answered with a smile. The peace conference would be held tomorrow afternoon, and as an important representative, he naturally had to attend. With roast goose in hand, he naturally wasn't afraid that the customers would scold him afterward. Okay. I love roast goose the most. Amy nodded. Every time she passed by the roast goose restaurant, she couldn't move her feet. Although her father's roast duck was super delicious, she still wanted to try the real roast goose. Chapter 1944. On the eve of the peace conference, Chaos City was very peaceful and peaceful. However, messenger pigeons flew out of the city from time to time, indicating that not everyone could sleep peacefully. Normal people might treat this day as a festival, but to Chaos City, this was an annual event. As Chaos City was established on this day, many children were looking forward to the festival tomorrow. Apart from the rulers of the various races, some well-informed merchants were also finding it difficult to sleep. At the Buffett Manor. Standing behind Ian, who was fishing under the moonlight, the Hill wore a worried expression as she said, "I wonder what the outcome of tomorrow's peace conference will be." With Alex's efforts, the Peace Alliance has already been established. Even if Andre's ambitions don't die, it'll be very difficult for him to create any more waves, Ian said calmly. You said that Andre is a calm lunatic, and he could do anything. The Hill's brows were still tightly furrowed. But he never does anything stupid. This is also the reason why he can make the Roth Empire become more powerful. Ian smiled and said, if he were a businessman, he would also be a very successful businessman. The Hill was deep in thought. Actually, everyone should thank Alex. He is a true warrior. He is both brave and smart. Ian looked at the moon on the surface of the water and sighed with emotion. It's hard to imagine that such a young man, who has experienced the lowest point of his life and reached the peak of his martial arts, can still use his martial arts with such restraint. He clearly knows what he wants to do and can execute it perfectly. A young man like him is really rare. Alex is indeed a very outstanding person. The Hill nodded slightly. Even though she didn't really care about those so-called powerhouses, this man who was changing this world deeply still attracted her attention. She had once thought that she should be one of the most powerful people among the young people. The Buffett Manor's massive financial empire gave her a lot of power over the entire Norland continent. However, when this world gradually became chaotic, she realized that her power was not stable. She couldn't even make this world change because of her. However, young powerhouses like Alex and Irina had stepped forward at a time like this. Their every action was changing the situation of this world, and everyone had no choice but to listen to them carefully. Money is the most worthless thing in this chaotic world. Strength is everything, Ian said with a smile. Money may be useless, but technology is. The train line to Vic Mountain has already been tested successfully. Once the war starts, we can send soldiers directly to Vic Mountain. A smile also on the Hill's face. Ian slowly turned his head to look at Hill, and the smile on his face grew brighter. What I thought most about you wasn't your keen financial sense, but your courage to innovate and not be afraid of failure. I don't need a caretaker. What I want is a successor who can lead the Buffett family into the next great era. I'm sure you can do this well. I will try my best to live up to your expectations. Hill nodded slightly. At the Moreton Manor. Master, I heard that things haven't been very peaceful recently. Why don't we go into hiding? I heard that the Roth Empire is going to attack soon. It's not a good idea to stay in Chaos City. Denise walked into Jeffrey's study, and looked at Jeffrey with a nervous expression. Jeffrey looked at her, and coldly chided, "Ignorant woman, you had no choice but to take refuge in Rodu. If the Roth Empire is going to attack Chaos City, how can you run to Rodu? We're just merchants. We have businesses in Rodu, and we're also humans. As long as we don't say anything, who will know?" Denise was getting anxious. My family Moreton thrives because of Chaos City. How can we retreat like this? Jeffrey said in a serious voice. Master, if you don't leave, then I'll leave with Cyril and the others. My family has already prepared a flying steed, and will set off tonight. Denise's eyes were averting her gaze. Jeffrey looked in the direction of the door, and coldly said, Get in here. Cyril ducked his head, and entered the room reluctantly. He didn't dare to look at Jeffrey with his head lowered. Instead, he hid behind Denise, and softly said, Father, come with us. We'll take all of our family assets with us, and we'll be able to enjoy ourselves in Rodu. Perhaps we'll be able to live even better than in Chaos City. You bastard. Jeffrey smashed the cup beside Cyril's feet. The tea and porcelain shards splashed all over his feet. If you don't want to go, then so be it. I'm going to leave with Mother and Uncle anyway. I can't stay and die with this lousy city. Cyril jumped back, and directly exited the study. Piss off. I'll pretend that I don't have a son like you. Jeffrey's hands and beard were trembling with rage. Master, we'll wait for you in Rodu. Denise didn't dare to stay for long either. She hurriedly turned and left. Soon, Denise, Cyril's family, and a few servants carried all of their belongings onto a horse-drawn carriage, and left the Moreton manor. Jeffrey leaned heavily against the back of his chair, and heaved a forlorn sigh. Right at this moment, a figure walked in with a small stove. Grandpa, it's getting cold. Let me make some hot tea for you. The small stove was placed on the coffee table, and the charcoal fire was burning brightly. Steam began to rise from the copper stove shortly after it was placed on the table. Jeffrey looked at Gloria, who was brewing tea with a serious expression, and asked, Do you want to leave? If Chaos City is gone, where will I call home? Gloria looked up at Jeffrey. This grandfather of hers had always been very imposing, but now, he looked like an ordinary old man. His forlorn expression was rather pitiful. Jeffrey's eyes lit up, and he asked, Aren't you afraid? I was a little afraid the last time in Rodu, but I'm not afraid now. Gloria shook her head. A smile appeared on Jeffrey's face. He glanced at the teapot and said, The tea smells very good. A guest gave it to me. He said that he picked it from his farm. I've brewed it once, and I think it tastes good, so I'm giving it to you to try, Gloria said with a smile. Soon, the tea was ready. Gloria poured a cup for Jeffrey, and placed it in front of him. Jeffrey looked at Gloria with a calm and serious expression, and said, Tomorrow, I'll announce that you're the head of Family Moreton. No pop-up window. Chapter 1945. People like Mr. Mac are usually called arsonists. They only light the fire, but they are not responsible for putting it out every time. Shouldn't it be the dream of 900 million girls? I used to think that potential could solve all problems. Until I met Mr. Mac, I realized that being rich doesn't mean you can eat well. It all depends on the mood of the boss. The next morning, the customers saw the new notice hanging on the door, and they couldn't stay calm. That's good. At least we can eat the new product tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. As expected, Mr. Mac's talent is enough to make the girls find excuses for him. I'm a humble customer, a silly person who just wants to eat a cup of soy milk with youtiao. Meg stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the customers who left in disappointment. He murmured to himself, I suddenly feel a little guilty. Irina walked up and said to him, What you're going to do today is to let them have more time to eat at Amy's. What do you want to eat for breakfast? Meg tilted his head and looked at her. Rainbow fried rice with soy milk, Irina said without hesitation. Okay. Meg nodded. I want to eat roast goose, Amy said enthusiastically as she came downstairs. Ugly Duckling, which was about to go forward, was stunned. Then, it slowly walked backward to Anne's feet and hid behind her. I'm tired of eating roast goose in the morning. Let's eat it at night, okay? Meg said with a smile. He didn't want to eat roast goose in the morning. He had made roast goose the whole night, and there were some side effects. He needed to rest first. Okay, then we'll eat it at night. Amy was a little reluctant, but she still nodded obediently. Meg made a nutritious breakfast. While eating, she looked at Amy and said, Dad has to go out today. Amy and, do you want to go to the magic potion shop next door to play with Sister Cece or go to the ice cream shop to play with your sisters? I want to go to the ice cream shop. I have an appointment with Miss Anna to play together, Shamit said without hesitation. And gestured with her hands and said, I'll go to the magic potion shop first and learn magic from Sister Cece. Okay, then little me will go to the ice cream shop to play with Anna, and then we'll go to the magic potion shop to learn magic. Meg nodded, fully respecting the children's choice. Meg was going to participate in the peace talks today. This was an important meeting that would affect the situation of the Norland continent, and even decide the future of the Norland continent. In comparison, even making money seemed less important. Ding! The peace conference has triggered a hidden mission. A peaceful environment is conducive to the spread of good food. Host, please try your best to influence the conference and strive to maintain peace on the Norland continent. According to your influence on the conference, you will receive different rewards. Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. What are the rewards? Meg raised his eyebrows. According to the difficulty of the mission, the rewards for this mission will be beyond your imagination. Host, please work hard to complete the mission. Aren't you a hooligan? What's the use of giving me a pie? Meg pursed his lips. If you give me the ability to flatten people, I can make Andre hide in the palace's bunker and not dare to come out. Host, please recognize the truth. This system is just a gourmet system. Although I'm a little more well-rounded and outstanding, you can't just ask me to flatten people. That's not harmonious enough, and it's easy to be flattened. Come on, I've never seen a system get kicked out of the group chat every day. How embarrassing, Meg teased. Nonsense. That's because I kicked them out myself. I'm a lofty person, and I don't want to associate myself with them. You have no idea how two-faced that harmonious system is. It shares all of the things it flatten in the group chat every day. TSK, that big sister, if it weren't for the fact that I was kicked out of the group chat. Tui, if it weren't for the fact that I kicked out of the group chat on my own accord, I would have definitely been flattened by now. Can I talk to you through one of them? Sure. That guy is everywhere. In the end, Meg wasn't able to get any information about the rewards from the system. However, he was able to confirm one thing: the system really did have a group chat, and there were many different systems in it. This guy had definitely been kicked out of the group chat before. Let's go. Amy and finished their breakfast before holding hands and walking out the door. Ugly Duckling hopped into Amy's arms and snuggled up comfortably. Soon, it began to purr. Snare sent me a secret letter 2 days ago. The flames of freedom have already blossomed all over the wind forest. They've decided to take advantage of Helena's departure from the wind forest to seize control of the forest, Irina said as she looked at Meg. Meg thought for a moment before shaking his head. That's going to be very difficult. There are more high-grade elves joining the fray this time. Meg shook his head, and said, however, they've lost their base of support, and there aren't enough elves who have chosen to side with the night elves. Trying to seize control of the wind forest is nothing more than a pipe dream. It's more likely that Helena will take advantage of this opportunity to ferret out all of the sparks hidden in the forest before snuffing them out in one fell swoop. Irina fell silent for a moment with a contemplative look on her face. She then looked at Meg and said, "According to the book you gave me, there are bound to be sacrifices and bloodshed in revolutions. Blood can indeed evoke the bloodlust in people, but useless sacrifices are not conducive to liberating the Wind Forest. After losing this core group of elves, it will be even more difficult for them to infiltrate the Wind Forest again." Meg shook his head. Irina's brows furrowed slightly, and she nodded as she said, "Then I'll write him a letter." The annual peace conference was the founding day of Chaos City, and it was also the most important and lively festival in Chaos City. The city lord's castle had already started decorating the streets in advance. Everyone was dressed in their best attire, and they were out on the streets. The lively shops and the shouts of hawkers on both sides of the streets were filled with liveliness and vitality. The ordinary people didn't seem to realize that this year's peace conference was different from the usual ones. As it was the most important day of the year and the longest holiday, people only wanted to shop and eat with their families and friends, or buy new clothes for themselves and their families. Meanwhile, the delicacy conference became the best place for Chaos City's residents to go. There were too many delicacies for the eyes to take in, and one would be able to obtain many delicacies just by walking around. The constant influx of people made the delicacy conference, which took up a very large area, very difficult to walk around. Meg stood on the opposite side of the street, and took a look from afar. He marveled at how well the Food Association organized this conference. As long as one was capable enough, such a huge flow of people would definitely not bury any delicacies. Selling vegetables is indeed a good business. Meg's gaze landed on the customers lining up in front of the seafood stall. Many of the housewives bought a huge bag of seafood at once, and the elven service staff received unanimous praise for their efficient and friendly service. Chapter 1946. The city lord's castle was already under martial law, and the surrounding 3 streets were all sealed off in preparation for the peace conference. The representatives of the various races arrived one after another. The elven delegation led by Helena was the first to arrive today. The forest trolls delegation came right after. After Bruno was killed, they elected a new leader, and kept a much lower profile. Oster led all the 10th tier powerhouses under him to Chaos City. Clearly, he was a little frightened by Alex. The 10 dragon tribes of the giant dragons had all sent representatives to attend the conference. Although Lewis and Douglas had joined the Peace Alliance on behalf of the giant dragons, the 2 of them were not enough to represent the interests of the entire giant dragon tribe in an event like the peace conference. The demons were in a similar situation. After the Abyss demons and Flaming demons got into a war, the internal division became very serious. The warring faction, which originally had the upper hand, also fell into internal strife, and did not trust each other. Hence, the 10 demon tribes all sent representatives to attend the conference. There were even some smaller demon tribes that joined forces to elect representatives to attend the conference. The Roth Empire's delegation was the last to arrive. At the same time, it was also the largest delegation. The delegation led by Andre Edward had more than 50 people. Apart from a group of civil officials, there were also 10th tier powerhouses escorted by the Magus Tower's president, Richard, and the Empire's military's Grand Marshal, Dominic. Andre really cherishes his life. He brought 10 10th tier powerhouses. Together with the 6 beside Sean, there are 16 of them, Michael said with a smile after hearing the report. Perhaps he wants to show off his muscles. He can casually bring 16 10th tier powerhouses out as escorts. This is something that no other race can do. Roland shook his head. No matter what, it's a good thing for us that Andre is here to attend the peace conference today. Michael stopped smiling, and his expression became serious. I should go and meet them. This peace conference is destined to not be harmonious. Before Michael could go out, Dicus had already hurried over. When he saw him, he anxiously said, "City Lord, the representatives of the Abyss Demons and Flaming Demons are fighting outside the City Lord's castle. Do you think we should go and stop them? Isn't this a little too ridiculous?" Michael frowned. He did not expect the feud between the two races to be so deep that they could actually fight on the eve of the peace conference. "Let's go and take a look." Meg and Irina estimated the time. When they arrived outside the City Lord's castle, they happened to see an intense battle. On one side was an abyss demon riding on a huge boar, on the other side was a flaming demon covered in flames. The wild boar smashed through the stone slabs, and the raging flames melted the stone slabs. The two sides went back and forth in front of the City Lord's mansion, and the fight was very lively. The people who were watching the show were the representatives from the various races who had just arrived. The probability of something like this happening in such an occasion was extremely low. Why wouldn't they enjoy watching a show before the tense meeting? Give me some strength. Don't be like a sissy. Meg saw Camilla and Dracula in the crowd, who didn't mind blowing things up. His gaze passed through the crowd, and landed on a group of people who were about to enter. The person in the lead was a dignified middle-aged man. It was the Emperor of the Roth Empire, Andre. Richard and Dominic led a group of 10 rank 10 bodyguards around him, and there were as many as 10 of them. These 10 people were not on the same level as the 6 beside Sean. They could be said to be the strongest 10th-tier powerhouses in the Roth Empire. Andre seemed to have heard the reminder. He stopped in his tracks and turned to look in Meg's direction. He gave Meg a meaningful smile. Meg frowned. Andre gave him an unfathomable feeling. He was like an old fox. Andre walked into the City Lord's castle. Dominic looked at Meg with a complicated expression, and followed him into the City Lord's castle. In Alex's memory, this empire's marshal was a powerful elder and leader who was full of chivalry. Back then, Alex had slowly risen to fame at the northwestern border. This empire's marshal had met him many times, and helped him with his martial arts. In the past 20 years, the Roth Empire's cavalry had become stronger under Dominic's leadership. Back then, he intended to let Alex take over and become the next empire's marshal. He even wanted to transfer him to his side to train and groom him personally. However, this was rejected by Alex. He resigned from his position in the military, and began to travel the continent to train his abilities. Why would Andre let Dominic follow him to attend the peace conference during such a critical period? If he were to stay in the Roth Empire's army now, he would be more intimidating than here. Furthermore, Andre did not lack this 10th-tier guard. Even he was not confident of killing Andre under the protection of 15 10th-tier powerhouses. "I'm afraid Andre still hasn't given up on you," Irina said softly. "It's just his wishful thinking." Meg pursed his lips. "Stop. Stop, stop, stop." At this moment, Michael hurried out of the door, and shouted. However, the Abyss Demon and the Flaming Demon, who were in a frenzy, did not take him seriously at all. They were still having fun fighting each other. Michael frowned, and drew out a long sword. In the instant that the two separated, he threw the long sword out. Ding! The long sword stood between the two of them, showing off its sharpness. That Abyss Demon and Flaming Demon stopped charging forward almost at the same time, and looked at Michael instinctively. Michael looked at the two demons, and solemnly said, "The two of you, this is Chaos City. The peace conference is being held here today. If the two of you have any disputes that you need to settle on the spot, please leave Chaos City to settle them yourselves, or settle them after the peace conference." Humph. The two demons looked at each other and snorted indignantly. However, they still stopped and did not continue fighting. Today's peace conference was due to the internal strife among the demons. They had to participate in it to fight for the greatest benefits for their race. After the conference, they had all the time in the world to settle the score. Michael then said to the various representatives who were watching the show, "The Parliament Hall has been opened. All the representatives can go to the Parliament Hall now. The peace conference is about to begin. Irina, you're here too." Dracula had already seen Meg and the rest. He came up to them with a smile, and sized up Meg again. He clicked his tongue, and said, "I thought I could suppress him after I became a progenitor. I didn't expect this fellow to become more and more perverted. He even killed Bruno just like that. He's not human." Chapter 1947. Camilla was half a step behind as she looked at Meg curiously. Alex's series of actions during this period could be said to be extremely ostentatious. Be it injuring the two princes of the Roth Empire consecutively or killing Bruno on the eve of the peace conference, all of them had shocked the Norland continent. And now, this man was standing in front of her. Although he was wearing a black and white mask, that calm aura and restrained sharpness that was hard to ignore made people maintain a certain level of vigilance around him. Of course, with his power, her vigilance was useless. "That's because you haven't eaten enough grass. Why don't we take this opportunity to talk about the exhibition again? Let's get a VIP room first. These people who came to attend the conference are not short of money." Irina looked at Dracula with a smile. No. Not this time. No matter what, I am still the most handsome vampire. I still have some burdens." Dracula shook his head. "Definitely next time." Irina didn't force him. "Definitely next time." "Hello." Camilla greeted Irina. Although they used to eat at the same table for a period of time, she still had a natural fear of Irina, and only wanted to keep a distance from her. "Why don't the two of you form a competition? The uncle-niece performance will definitely be more entertaining." Irina's eyes lit up. "I refuse," Camilla said without hesitation. Eating in private was one thing, but it was too shameful for her to perform eating grass. It was not something she could do. "It's time to go in." Meg glanced at the empty City Lord's castle entrance, and reminded her. "Let's talk about the exhibition next time." Irina walked in the direction of the City Lord's castle, and curiously asked, "What's the attitude of the vampires towards this peace conference?" "We don't need any territory. What we have now is quite good," Dracula said. "It is quite good." Irina nodded. She was quite satisfied with Dracula's answer. Meg also glanced at Dracula in surprise. This guy had thought things through quite thoroughly. In the enormous meeting hall, the circular table was already filled with representatives of various races. Chaos City arranged the seating arrangement of the representatives of the various races. At least, they didn't let the races with old grudges sit next to each other to prevent conflicts during the peace talks. However, the City Lord's castle was obviously a little meticulous with the seating arrangements. The Forest Trolls and the Roth Empire's seats were separated by the giant dragon's representatives. The Elven race's seats were arranged next to Chaos City's representative team, and the demons and orcs were between them and the Roth Empire. Outside of the central round table, there were 3 circles of seats where the experts of various races were seated. The representatives of the various races and the participants had basically all arrived, but the huge hall was silent. Only the sound of the staff of the City Lord's mansion running back and forth could be heard. "Irina and Alex have arrived." An announcement came from the door. Everyone's eyes turned to the door and fell on Alex and Irina, who walked in side by side. During this period of time, the two of them had been in the limelight. They were even more famous than when they were roaming the Norland continent. The elves were stirred up until they almost fell apart. They guided lightning to strike the devil and sealed it again. They killed Bruno, cut off one of Josh's ears, and chopped off one of Sean's arms. All these things pushed Alex and Irina's reputations to the peak. Compared to 3 years ago, Alex had become stronger and more flawless. He could do whatever he wanted, but no one could do anything to him. They didn't even know what Alex looked like now. That black and white mask blocked all prying eyes, and at the same time, made him even more dangerous. Unknown whereabouts, unknown appearance, unknown upper limit of power. All of these made Alex extremely dangerous. As for Irina, her radiance was overshadowed by Alex's halo. Furthermore, she had already left the Wind Forest, but she was still the elven princess in everyone's eyes. If there was a woman in this world who had the same aura as Alex, it would be Irina, and only Irina. However, not everyone liked the two of them. The Forest Trolls representative team looked at Alex, who had just walked in. Their eyes were red as they tried to control their emotions. Bruno's death made them lose a powerful leader, and also made the Forest Trolls suffer a lot of mockery. If not for the fact that they couldn't beat him, they wouldn't have been able to control their emotions. Rex looked at Meg with a gloomy gaze. It was too uncomfortable to look at him, but they couldn't kill him. However, they could only endure it. Helena's expression also became gloomy after the two of them walked in. In just a few months, the elves went from an above-average race to the joke of the Norland continent. It was all thanks to them. Irina had dug out more than half of the Wind Forest's foundation. She was having a headache about how to rebuild it. The representative of the horror demons also had a gloomy expression. However, he lowered his head, and didn't even dare to look at Alex. Andre looked at Meg calmly. He was expressionless, and no one knew what he was thinking. Sean sat beside Andre. His empty left sleeve was a little glaring, but his expression was also very calm. He didn't seem to hold a grudge against Meg for losing his arm. Meg glanced at the people in the venue. Basically, all the people in charge of the various races were present. This was a rare sight. However, his gaze was attracted by the Roth Empire's representative team. Apart from Michael, Roland, and Novin, the three big shots of Chaos City, Crassus and Julian were also present. When did Michael convince the two of them to join Chaos City? Mag was a little surprised. Regardless of whether it was influence or power, the addition of Crassus and Urian to Chaos City would undoubtedly increase Chaos City's power by leaps and bounds. It was just that Crassus was still in Rodu holding the opening ceremony for the Magus Tower's Magic Caster Convention a few days ago. Now, he was sitting with Chaos City's representative team. It was a little magical. Meg and Irina sat down according to their placards. On Meg's left was the Forest Trolls representative team, and on Irina's right was the Orc War Faction's representative team led by Oster. This seating arrangement is very spiritual. Meg looked around with a slight smile. The Forest Trolls representative team and Oster became much more nervous after Meg and Irina sat down. Don't be afraid. I'm not someone who would fight in such an occasion. Meg glanced at the Forest Troll who was secretly swallowing his saliva. You know I love peace. I know. That Forest Troll nodded sullenly. Peak. Chapter 1948. This is your last chance. Believe me, as long as you do as I say, you will get everything you want. Supreme power, invincible power, and Irina, whom you have been longing for. As long as you do as I say, everything will be yours." In the dark and empty hall, Josh sat on the floor with his hair disheveled. His eyes were red, and he pursed his lips without saying a word. Only that seductive voice kept echoing in his mind. "You have to know that no matter what the outcome of the peace talks is, you will be a useless pawn. If your father reconciles with Alex, you will be pushed out without hesitation. If the war starts, Sean will be put in an important position, and you will be useless. Are you willing to accept that? I'm the only one who can help you. I'm the only one who's truly on your side. Let go of your laughable ego and accept me wholeheartedly. I'm going to make you the most powerful being on the Norland continent. I'm going to give you the power to crush Alex, and I'm going to unify the entire Norland continent. You're going to become the supreme ruler of this empire." Richard went down south with father. "I am alone. How can I control the Roth Empire?" Josh said with a hint of fatigue and powerlessness in his voice. "If I say you can, you can. I can help you control everyone you want to control and make them obey you completely." The ghostly voice sounded again. "We need war. We need more power of resentment. The more power of resentment there is, the more powerful we can become. I can even summon an invincible army of undead knights for you to help you unify the Norland continent. Now, the opportunity is here. Andre has taken away those powerhouses who are difficult to control. Rodu is already an empty city. As long as you agree, this city will belong to you. Undead cavalry." Josh's eyes lit up. "You're saying that as long as more people die, more resentment will appear, and I'll become stronger?" "Yes. You will be stronger than Alex soon, and take revenge for your ear with your own hands." "Alex." Josh stood up slowly with a strange smile on his pale face. "Then, let's start from the Magus Tower, Night Elves, in a hidden tree hole." Under the dim candlelight, a dozen masked elves squatted on the ground and looked at the young elf with burning eyes. "The conditions aren't ripe yet, and there are still too few of us dark elves. If we act rashly, we'll only incur unnecessary casualties, and even destroy the foundation that we've just established. As such, we have to postpone the uprising. We have to continue to infiltrate and recruit more elves into our ranks." Snare said in a hushed voice. "But Helena has left the Wind Forest. If we miss this opportunity, we won't have another chance. If we don't seize this opportunity to revolt and occupy the Wind Forest, it will only be more difficult in the future." A young elf turned to Snare with a perplexed expression, and said, "The inspection of the night elves in the forest is becoming stricter and stricter. We've only just caught a few night elves a few days ago, and if we continue to drag this out, more of our companions will be captured before being taken down one by one." "That's right. They're even offering handsome rewards to those who report them. There are even traitors among our ranks, and that's a huge blow to the morale of our members," another elf chimed in. The atmosphere in the tree hole became a little tense and solemn. They had taken a huge risk by coming here today, and they had come here to discuss the matter of the uprising. However, they didn't think that Snare would inform them that the uprising would be postponed. Snare's brows also furrowed upon hearing everyone's words. He knew all of this very well. In fact, he had attempted to rescue a captured night elf the day before, only to give up because the night elves were too heavily guarded. However, he had received a secret letter from Her Highness this morning. She didn't agree with their uprising and believed that their chances of success were extremely low. This was in line with his judgment. Following the last slave uprising, the elven structure in the Wind Forest had been fractured to a certain extent. The elves who hadn't managed to escape were under extremely strict surveillance, and it was very difficult to infiltrate the elven army. The mid-level elves were the ones who benefited from the uprising, so it was even more difficult to get them to rebel. In order to ensure their safety, they were using a one-way communication system. At present, there were several thousand night elves underground in the Wind Forest, but he didn't know the exact number, nor did he know who the night elves were. Aside from trying to take control of the Wind Forest, their objective was to use their blood to incite more elves to join the uprising. This is Her Highness' opinion. At this stage, it's very difficult for her to appear in the Wind Forest to provide us with any assistance, Snare said. Her Highness. All of the elves fell silent upon hearing this. They were even more convinced by Irina's judgment. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Right at this moment, a sharp whistle suddenly sounded from outside. Snare's expression changed as he hurriedly yelled, "Crap! Someone's here. Retreat according to the plan." All of the elves hurriedly got up from the ground before rushing out from behind the tree hole. Remember, be careful and don't expose yourselves. Put the plan on hold for now and wait for the next meeting. Snare cautioned. All of the elves nodded before quickly dispersing. Snare also quickly departed from the scene, but he didn't go too far away. Instead, he squatted down on the branch of a lush tree in the distance and put on his cloak inside out. A faint light lit up, and the color of the cloak gradually merged with the color of the tree trunk, making it difficult to tell that someone was hiding here. Around 3 minutes later, a group of over 100 elven guards arrived at the tree hole under the lead of a middle-aged elf. After inspecting the tree hole, the elven guard let loose a few curses before quickly departing with the rest of the elven guards. Looks like there's already a traitor among us. Snare put down his hat and murmured to himself as he looked on at the departing elven guards. He had changed the location of the gathering 3 times, and the last change was an hour ago. He was the one who had decided on the location, but the traitor had managed to find him so quickly. Thankfully, he had set up Nightingale around the perimeter in advance. Otherwise, all of the core members would have been wiped out. Right at this moment, a cold voice suddenly sounded behind him. There's a traitor among you, and there's more than one. Snare's hair stood on end as he hurled a string of flying daggers through the air while hurtling back in retreat. A thin water barrier appeared, and the flying daggers were unable to advance any further. Chapter 1949. Snare's expression changed slightly upon seeing that his attack had failed, and he immediately turned to flee. However, water barriers appeared in all 3 directions, sealing off all avenues of escape. Don't be nervous, Snare, I'm not here to capture you, the intruder said, and didn't do anything aside from the water barriers. Then why did Princess Sally stop me? Snare leaned against a tree trunk as he appraised Sally, who was standing on a thin branch of a tree, with a wary expression. The person who had suddenly appeared was none other than Sally, who had been in the limelight recently and had been hailed as the future elven queen of the Wind Forest. Snare naturally kept a respectful distance away from this popular figure of Helena's. He hadn't heard about her persecution of the night elves, but he knew that Helena was definitely going to find someone she could control to become the princess of the elven race. Now that she had appeared here and stopped him, he had already given up all hope that he would be able to leave safely. She was too powerful, and he was no match for her. She was able to progress to the 8th tier at such a young age, and even though she was still slightly inferior to the princess, she was still quite a prodigy. Helena had chosen her for a reason. There was no other elf as exceptional as her among the younger generation of the Wind Forest. Sally looked at Snare, and said in a calm voice, I'm here to tell you that Helena left a contingency plan before she left. If you do anything during this period of time, you'll definitely run afoul of Helena's arrangements. I hope you can stay calm. A hint of surprise flashed through Snare's eyes, but he was still appraising Sally with a wary expression. Why are you telling me this? Sally looked into his eyes, and replied, because I'm also an elf. Snare could see the pain and conflict in her eyes in that instant, and he seemed to have understood what she was thinking. He nodded and said, "Thank you. Let me give you a piece of advice: don't trust anyone. There are no friends that you can't betray for the sake of your own interests." Sally's expression quickly returned to normal as she spoke in an indifferent voice. At the same time, she withdrew the water barriers in all directions. "Thank you." Snare expressed his gratitude again before taking a final glance at Sally. He then put on his hat and leaped down from the tree, disappearing into the forest in the blink of an eye. "Am I doing the right thing?" Sally murmured to herself as she stood on the treetop and looked at the vast forest. No one answered her. There was only the sound of the wind blowing through the forest. The Grand Peace Conference officially opened under the auspices of Michael. In the past 100 years, the rulers of all the races on the Norland continent had never gathered together like today. The scale of the conference was truly the highest. However, in the past 100 years, there had been some conflicts of interest between the various races. There were even neighbors who had been fighting for 100 years. There were new and old grudges, and the atmosphere was not harmonious. There were even some who were at daggers drawn. The appearance of Crassus and Julian at Chaos City's seats also shocked all the other representatives. Although everyone knew that the two of them had been staying in Chaos City recently, given their personalities, they naturally wouldn't join any side casually, especially the Crassus. Their status in the Roth Empire was even higher than Alex's. However, today, both Alex and Crassus were standing on Chaos City's side. It was really a little magical. Michael started off by talking about the benefits that the various races had brought to the people in the past 100 years of peace. He also talked about how the various races had cooperated and made some breakthroughs and changes, and the results were remarkable. These words made Meg sleepy. Luckily, the forest troll representative sitting next to him was really an idiot. The way he sat next to him was too weird, and helped him relieve a lot of his tiredness. To put it bluntly, today's peace conference was a negotiation between the peace-loving party and the pro-war party. The peace-loving party had already formed a peace alliance with great momentum. Meanwhile, the pro-war party led by the Roth Empire was fighting their own battles. The demons had already fallen apart, and were no longer a concern. The rest was between the Roth Empire and the Peace Alliance. As for the orcs, Oster couldn't even deal with Connie now. He had to bring all the powerhouses with him to protect himself whenever he went out. Now, half of the Twilight Forest was in a state where there were no powerhouses protecting it, and no one in charge. The elves were in a similar situation. He and Irina had stirred things up, liberated a large batch of elven slaves, and even established the Night Elves. It was a devastating blow to the social structure of the Wind Forest. Meanwhile, Snare and a group of like-minded elves were still dividing the elves. Just these things alone were enough to give Helena a headache. How could she have the energy to talk about war? The peace treaty signed back then ended the racial wars on the Norland continent, and ushered in a period of peaceful development. 100 years have passed, and all the races agreed to hold a peace conference 100 years later to renew the peace treaty. Michael paused for a moment. He looked at the representatives of the various races present, and said, "Everyone is here today to fulfill the 100-year promise. Regarding this, you can all give your opinions. We will discuss it thoroughly and make a wise decision for the Norland continent. There's no point in fighting. The peace treaty is a good one. We dwarves are willing to renew it," the king of the dwarves said straightforwardly. We goblins also support the renewal of the peace treaty. There will be no winners if the racial wars are to resume, the goblin chief chimed in. Orcs will never be slaves. Connie shouted as she stood up. She looked at the strange expressions on everyone's faces, and swallowed before shrinking back. She lowered her voice, and said, "We also support the renewal of the peace treaty." Oster wanted to stand up. However, Meg glanced at him. Oster immediately sat down again. His Adam's apple rolled, but he didn't dare to stand up in the end. Michael stood up again. He looked at everyone and solemnly said, "I represent Chaos City to make a statement. Chaos City was born because of peace. After all the races signed the peace treaty here and built the Bowtie prison, it slowly developed into a city that accommodates all the races and allows them to coexist peacefully. We will always stand on the side of peace. At the same time, we also hope that all the races can support the peace treaty. War will only make all the races pay a terrible price, and it will be a devastating disaster for the ordinary people. Our enemy now is the devil. From the murals, war might increase the devil's power. That is a terrifying existence that can destroy all the races. We should work together to find the devil that escaped from the seal it again, and find a way to kill it permanently. We, the giant dragons, support Chaos City's approach. The most important thing now is to find the devil that disappeared. Once it regains its power, or unseals more devils, it will be a disaster for the Norland continent." Douglas also stood up slowly, and coldly said, "Don't forget that day at the Thunderstorm Mountains. We only faced half of the devil that was sealed, and we almost paid a terrible price to seal it again." "I object." Right at this moment, a calm voice sounded. Chapter 1950. André stood up slowly and calmly said to everyone, 100 years have passed, and the Norland continent now is different from before. The peace treaty that was drafted back then is no longer applicable. The Roth Empire requests to redistribute the territories according to each race's power. The various representatives had different expressions when they heard that, and no one said anything for a while. Meg looked at André, and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. If one were to judge André from a historical point of view, he would definitely be considered a wise ruler. During his 30-odd years on the throne, the Roth Empire was prosperous and its people were at peace. Their national power had increased rapidly, and they had trained their soldiers and trained their horses. They had also nurtured a large number of powerful magic casters. On top of that, he was also an ambitious ruler. He kept a low profile and waited for the right time to fight for more territories and living space for the Roth Empire and the human race during the peace treaty. During the racial war back then, the human race had paid a terrible price before they finally obtained the right to sit in the peace treaty. However, because they were weak, they obtained a piece of barren land in the end. It was the human race who used their own hands to turn that barren land into fertile farmland, and built many cities. Given the human race's current rate of reproduction, the Roth Empire's current territory was indeed not enough. Given his current power, it seemed reasonable for him to request for more territory. If that was the case, Meg might not stop the human race from expanding. That was reasonable. However, André wasn't someone who would be satisfied with just having enough land for the human race to thrive. What he wanted was for the world to bow down to him. If he wanted too much, he would naturally cross the bottom line of the various races, and the war between races would start again. Louis looked at André with a frown, and said, "André, the most urgent thing now is to resolve the threat from the devil. As for the redistribution of the territories, we can discuss it later. First, we have to let the various races of the Norland continent let down their guard, and really work together. To the Roth Empire, the most urgent thing now is to redistribute the territories." André looked at Louis with a mocking smile. "To you giant dragons, 100 years is just a blink of an eye. You were the ones who signed the contract back then, and you are still the ones sitting here now. You can wait, but I can't. After another 100 years, it's hard to say if the Roth Empire will still exist in this world. I'm not signing this contract. Andre's forceful and reasonable request caused the entire hall to fall silent. As expected, the older the ginger, the spicier it is. Meg looked at Andre with a serious expression. Louis was stumped by Andre's words. For a moment, he didn't know how to retort. He was indeed present at the peace conference 100 years ago, and he was also one of the people who drafted the treaty. There were many familiar faces among the representatives of the various races present today, such as the king of the dwarves, the goblin chief, and Helena. If Bruno hadn't been killed by Alex yesterday, he would be sitting here now. It was he who signed the contract as the Forest Trolls representative. The lifespan of a human was too short. A few decades would pass in the blink of an eye for a giant dragon, but for a human, it might be the length of a complete life. The king of the Roth Empire who had signed the agreement on behalf of the humans was already Andre's ancestor. Andre might already be dead in 50 years, let alone 100 years. It was reasonable for Andre to refuse to sign the contract. None of the representatives were in a hurry to speak. They were afraid that Andre and his Roth Empire would set their eyes on their territory. So, you're planning to restart the racial war? Mag asked Andre. He didn't keep quiet anymore. No, this is not my choice. Andre looked at Mag and said, all I want is a piece of land where my citizens can thrive. There are still many pieces of land like this on the Norland continent that have been abandoned. What the Roth Empire wants isn't much, and it's not too much. You know very well that no race will give their land to you. Aren't you trying to snatch the land from the other races by saying this? Douglas said coldly. I'm not ambitious, and I don't want the land of the other races. I only want half of the land that has been abandoned by the dragons, Andre said calmly. I think you're dreaming. How dare you set your sights on the giant dragons? Isaiah the Tyrannosaurus dragon roared angrily as he glared at Andre with his bell-sized eyes. The land under Dragon Island is all abandoned. Back then, the giant dragons occupied Dragon Island and took the most fertile land on the Norland continent for themselves. If the giant dragons really want to form an alliance with the Roth Empire to fight against the devils, why won't you give up a piece of land that's useless to you? Andre asked with a smile. What if we don't agree? Louis said in a low voice. Then I can only expand outwards in order to let more of my people survive. As for whether it's to the west, east, or south, I can't be sure, and I won't make any guarantees. Andre was still smiling. The orcs' representatives who were in the northwest of the Roth Empire's capital changed their expressions. Helena frowned. The Wind Forest was in the east of the Roth Empire. The three giant dragons also frowned. Andre's threat was very obvious. The Roth Empire couldn't possibly attack Dragon Island, so he stated his target very clearly. Regardless of what the colossal dragon tribe says, I'll just attack the other tribes next to me. It was a barbaric yet effective method. I think you should know that the giant dragons, goblins, dwarves, orcs, 108 tribes, Chaos City, night elves, and other races and forces have formed a peace alliance yesterday. Once you attack the allies of the Peace Alliance, the Roth Empire will have to face the Peace Alliance, and not one of your neighbors, Michael said in a low voice. That won't affect any of my decisions, Andre replied calmly. Andre, do you really want to make the whole world your enemy? Is your Roth Empire really so powerful that it can stand against the whole world? How arrogant! Louis said. From the fact that you can't wait to form the so-called Peace Alliance, the current Roth Empire does indeed have the capital to do so. Andre nodded as he looked at the representatives of the various races with a mocking expression. So, what makes you think that an empire that requires all of you to unite against should continue to hole up in the most barren land on the Norland continent and allow all of you to continue reaping the fruits of your labor? Who's the arrogant one? Brilliant. Even Meg couldn't help but want to give Andre's speech a thumbs up. His logic was flawless. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.